The cold wind blew across the courtyard of Winterfell, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the memory of countless ghosts. Snow fell in gentle waves, and though the white wolf banners now flew where once the direwolf and the flayed man had battled for prominence, the stones of the ancient keep still felt worn and eternal beneath Sansa's feet. She remembered walking through that courtyard as a girl, watching her brothers trained with practiced swords, daydreaming of a gallant knight who might sweep her away to a world of ballads and minstrels' tunes. But she had grown up, quite painfully, and Winterfell with her. Sometimes she felt the ancient keep recognized she was no longer that starry-eyed child but a woman wreathed in an uncertain future. She stood on the elevated walkway, a quiet silhouette against the swirling flurries. Her cloak was trimmed with soft white fur. It was heavier than any she had worn before, its clasp shaped into the direwolf sigil of House Stark. It had been less than a fortnight since the ravens arrived bearing their bold, impossible message from the south. Rhaegar Targaryen's heir, a young man claiming the name Aegon, was prepared to parley with the north. He had offered an alliance that stretched beyond mere treaties. He had offered marriage. And the bride he proposed to take was Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell. She had read the letter 3 times in the privacy of her solar, her eyes moving slowly across each line, searching for betrayal, for cunning, for falsehood. Yet, as the days went by, more letters came, and they did not contradict the first. Aegon Targaryen, who had been presumed dead as a child during the sack of King's Landing, claimed he had been saved and raised in exile by loyalists. He possessed the gold-and-silver hair of House Targaryen, the bearing of a prince, and the cunning of those who survived by subterfuge. Now he wished to claim the Iron Throne his father had once been heir to, and to do so, he wanted the backing of the North. The letter spoke of forging a bond between Stark and Targaryen, bridging a rift that had, according to him, shaped the tragedies of the realm. Sansa remembered the hush that fell over the great hall when she had revealed the contents to her assembled bannermen. Lords of the North, Karstarks, Manderleys, Glovers, and others had filled Winterfell with their retinues. In their eyes, she saw reflection upon old wounds, upon the reason Ned Stark had marched south so many years ago, upon the blood that had been spilled in the name of Targaryens and rebellions. Some bristled, some looked thoughtful. But in a land still healing from war, a strong alliance might be worth its weight in gold dragons. Or it might be a trap. They had debated and deliberated. She had listened. She took a breath of the frosty air, summoning her own memories, the bitterness she felt toward the Lannisters, the war that ravaged the realm, and the stories of her Aunt Lyanna's tragic end. Rhaegar Targaryen had a complicated legacy in the north. And yet, as she closed her eyes, she could almost sense her father's voice within the ancient walls, reminding her that sometimes the good of the realm outweighed old grudges. She had learned, with difficulty, to weigh politics against personal feelings. So she had prepared. A raven was sent to the young Targaryen, inviting him to Winterfell to treat under the old ways. And to her surprise, he agreed. The day arrived when Aegon Targaryen's small procession passed beneath Winterfell's gatehouse. The northern lords gathered to greet the southern prince. Though he was not attended by dragons, he exuded a quiet gravity. He did not flaunt expensive trappings, for after all, he was forging alliances, not putting on a show of force. Sansa, swathed in white, stood upon the steps of the great keep, her hands clasped, her posture regal in a way she had once mimicked from her mother. A hush lay over the courtyard as the visitors dismounted from their horses. Snow crunched underfoot. He removed his gloves, and then pulled back the hood of his cloak. In that moment, Sansa saw the glint of silver in his hair, half braided back from a face that was both youthfully earnest and watchful. His eyes, a deep lilac, shifted across the gathered northern folk, as though understanding he was stepping on precarious ground. One misstep, one hint of arrogance, and the north would close its doors. And yet there was a certain calm around him. He bowed respectfully to her. Lady Stark. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. Prince Aegon. He looked around at the massive courtyard, at the watchers. The tension in the cold air nearly crackled. Then he offered a smaller smile, more subdued, perhaps aware that too much warmth from a Targaryen might alarm, rather than reassure. "Thank you for welcoming us. We have much to discuss." Melinin. Within the great hall of Winterfell, a roaring fire in the hearth offered some reprieve from the chill. Sansa had arranged a banquet suitable to greet a royal guest, though times were still lean after years of war. She had placed the most prominent northern lords at the central tables. Though they wore courtesy in their eyes, she did not miss the suspicion lingering in them. If Aegon noticed, he gave no sign. He walked with a measured elegance that reminded her, almost disconcertingly, of the stories about his father. Long ago, Rhaegar had been described as pensive and graceful, though he carried heartbreak in his songs. Sansa sat at the high table, parted from him only by a seat for Arya, who had returned from her own dark journeys. At first, Arya had insisted on wearing plain leathers and sitting with the men, but Sansa, with difficulty, convinced her it would be better to appear united. Seated on Sansa's other side was Lord Manderly, a substantial presence with a hearty appetite for both food and politics. As they began to eat, the hum of conversation slowly grew, filling the hall with cautious speculation and simmering curiosity. Aegon, for his part, spoke in measured tones. He asked Lord Glover about the harvest in Deepwood Motte, listened attentively to the Karstark's comments on rebuilding roads. Sansa felt a pang of respect. He did not come off as a man who believed the realm's problems beneath him. Only when the plates were cleared, and the great hall's doors were closed to all but the principal lords and retainers, did the serious conversation begin. Servants carried cups of mulled wine. The fire spat sparks, as if to punctuate the tension. It was then Aegon stood, though he did so in a way that wasn't grandstanding. He inclined his head to the Northman, then turned to Sansa. "This is no trifling matter," he said clearly. His voice was calm but carried a certain poetic resonance. "I have come here with the hope of forging a bond between our houses. I know the North has little reason to trust a Targaryen. The memories of Robert's rebellion linger. The tragedies, the heartbreak. These are wounds that do not simply vanish with the turning of seasons. But I stand before you not as the usurper of your lands or your freedom. I come as a prospective ally. The realm has been torn by war for too long. The Iron Throne is contested yet again. Even the Lannisters, who once held it firmly, have been weakened. There are enemies, old and new, waiting to tear Westeros apart. I believe that if the North and the Targaryens unite, we can bring stability and a lasting peace." "Nine." He paused, letting the words settle. In the silence, Sansa became painfully aware of how many eyes were now upon her. It was as if the entire hall, and perhaps all the North, held its breath, waiting for her response. She rose, carefully smoothing her cloak, and held his gaze. For an instant, her heart pounded in her ears. She thought of her father's quiet wisdom, her mother's fierce love, and the battered road that had brought her here. "We are a people who remember," she said softly. "But we also know that time marches on. The dear wolves endure, and so must we. You have proposed a marriage alliance. You speak of forging a new future for Westeros. If I consent to this, it must be built on a foundation of mutual respect, of unwavering honesty. We have had our fill of cunning words and hollow promises." "No? D?" Aegon gave a gentle incline of his head, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I offer a vow. Should you become my queen consort, I will treat the North not as a conquered territory, but as an equal partner. The Northmen will remain free to choose their own ways, to worship their own gods. Your seat, Lady Stark, will be second only to mine. And if the gods grant us heirs, they shall be heirs not only to the Iron Throne but also to the proud legacy of House Stark. I promise in the sight of men and gods that I come not to subjugate the North, but to cherish it." "Then?" She studied him, letting the hush in the hall deepen. Could he truly keep such promises once power crowned him in King's Landing? She might never be certain until it was too late. But the alternative was endless war, or forging alliances with houses that had done her family unspeakable harm. Sansa closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then reopened them, letting the clarity wash over her. "We will give ourselves time to see who you truly are, Prince Aegon. Stay in Winterfell as our guest, Learn our ways, our hearts. Let us learn yours. If you prove true, you will have your alliance." There were nods from the northern lords. None spoke in protest outright, but their expressions were guarded. They understood that this was the beginning of a negotiation, not a completed contract. Aegon inclined his head in gratitude. As the meeting concluded, the servants returned to clear away the empty cups, and the lords drifted out into the corridors in small, murmuring clusters. That night, from the battlements, Sansa watched the distant pinpricks of lanterns in the barracks. She felt the swirl of uncertainty rising within her. She remembered the illusions she had nursed as a girl, of courtly love and handsome princes. How she had once dreamed of a Targaryen prince from the old songs, never knowing that reality was made of darker threads. Aegon was more flesh and blood than any story could convey. Whether that was a comfort or a threat, she couldn't yet decide. But she felt the weight of Winterfell pressing into her, urging caution. Perhaps it also urged hope. In the days that followed, the promised time of learning one another's hearts began. Aegon stayed in the royal apartments once reserved for visiting kings. He dined with the lords and ladies of the north, asked for tours of the grounds, and endured the snow and cold with only mild discomfort. Sansa couldn't help but notice how he handled the fierce temperatures. He wore layered furs, but never once complained. He spoke softly with the stable hands, praising the northern stock of horses as strong and hardy. He took suggestions from the blacksmiths, even complimenting their craft. It was small, but these gestures of respect toward the north, its people, its craftsmanship, its old ways, did not go unnoticed. Arya watched him with her own brand of wariness, a silent shadow in the background. One afternoon, Sansa found her sister in the training yard, loosing arrows at a practice dummy. When Sansa asked Arya's opinion of the Targaryen prince, her sister only shrugged. "He's quick," Arya remarked at last, knocking another arrow. "He studies people, reminds me a bit of you, in King's Landing, back when you were forced to watch everything and speak nothing. But you learned how to survive a nest of vipers." Sansa felt a tremor at that memory. "And do you think he's just trying to survive? Or do you think there's more to him?" Arya fixed her with an unreadable look. "That's for you to discover, isn't it? I won't pretend to be the best judge of men's hearts. I've learned that hearts can hide knives. Bantimnast. And. That evening, Sansa found herself walking the ramparts alongside Aegon. A half-moon illuminated the sky, lending a pearlescent glow to the blanket of snow below. Their breath formed small clouds in the cold. She was silent at first, letting him speak if he chose. Eventually, he broke the hush. "You're different than I expected," he said, pulling his fur cloak closer around him. "All my life I heard stories of House Starks, stiff-necked lords and iron sense of justice. I expected someone formidable, distant. But you have a quiet steel." "Numb." She glanced at him, her hair pulled back from her face by the night winds. "Winter makes us all a bit like that. Survival demands it." He placed a hand gently on the worn stone of the battlement. "When I was younger, living in exile, I was told many tales. Of my father, the tragic prince, of my grandfather, the mad king, and also of the North, of how Ned Stark was the only man who kept his honor while the realm turned on itself. Now I see that the North's honor is also laced with caution. And you, Lady Sansa, you are not just a figurehead. You seem to carry the entire castle on your shoulders. There is a great sorrow in your eyes." "No." She inhaled sharply, feeling the sting of old memories. "We all have sorrows. The North has bled. So have I. Honor is a comfort until it kills you or those you love. My father taught me the importance of doing what is right, no matter the cost. My mother taught me to protect my family, no matter the danger. Reconciling those two lessons has not been easy." He nodded, thoughtful. Then, turning, he met her gaze. "I cannot erase what happened, nor can I bear the blame for events that occurred before my birth. But if the North will have me, I would do everything in my power to ensure it never suffers such wounds again." She saw his eyes flicker, searching hers. "I mean that sincerely." "Words come easily," she returned quietly, not harshly but with gentle skepticism. The actions that follow are what matter. In the days that followed, Sansa watched. She observed how Aegon interacted with the lords, how he spoke to small folk, how he responded to daily annoyances. On one occasion, the stablemaster's boy accidentally startled his horse, and the creature nearly knocked Aegon into the snow. The boy bowed repeatedly, terrified he'd incur the wrath of a Targaryen prince, but Aegon only laughed and helped the boy steady the horse. "We all have accidents," he said. "No harm done." That small moment, observed from a distance, loosened something in Sansa's chest. Rage would have been the easy route, but he chose kindness. She wondered if it was genuine, or just another performance. Yet, if it was a performance, it was a meticulously consistent one. During one dinner, the subject of potential threats arose. Unsurprisingly, talk of the Iron Throne's precarious state dominated the conversation. There was mention of Cersei Lannister's diminishing power in King's Landing, of Euron Greyjoy's chaotic influence, and of other factions vying for advantage. A few times, Sansa mentioned the possibility of White Walkers, the old threat that had once menaced the realm. Though the long night had ended, tensions at the Wall, and beyond, remained. The conversation weighed heavily on everyone. Even so, Aegon spoke with caution and a desire for synergy. "If a threat arises from beyond the Wall, we must be ready," he acknowledged. The realm cannot ignore the North's warnings again. At that, the Northman's eyes warmed slightly. It had long been a point of bitterness that Southerners dismissed the terrors of the North as legends. Aegon's willingness to acknowledge those terrors, founded or not, was a point in his favor. By now, Sansa could sense that some of the bannermen who had initially been most resistant were beginning to soften. Though no one declared undying loyalty, she could see it in the inclination of heads and the more relaxed posture. The subtle shift in body language told her a new story, that they were at least open to the possibility of following this Targaryen if she, their Lady of Winterfell, agreed. Finally came the moment when a formal proposal had to be addressed. It was mid-morning, the winter sky a wash of gray and white, when Sansa gathered her most trusted advisors in the Solar. She waited for Aegon, who arrived accompanied by only a single retainer, a swarthy man named Raleigh Duckfield, Sir Duck, as he called himself. The retainer stood at the doorway, arms folded, while Aegon faced Sansa and the Northmen. This was no grand audience hall, merely a private corner of Winterfell's labyrinth. The smaller setting, though more intimate, also felt like an antechamber to destiny. Aegon spoke first. "I have spent these weeks as your guest, Lady Sansa, and I hope in that time I have not brought you cause for regret. I appreciate your hospitality and the openness you have shown, despite the old history between our houses. I stand by my offer, a marriage alliance that would unite the North and the Targaryen claim to the Iron Throne, if the gods will it so." Sansa let a breath pass her lips. Across the table, she saw the watchful eyes of men like Lord Manderley and Lord Glover, as well as Arya. She lifted her chin. "We have seen your conduct. We have weighed your words. If we agree to this alliance, I have certain conditions." She glanced at the Maester, who unfurled a small parchment listing those conditions, from the recognition of the North's self-governance in matters of faith and local law, to specific protections for the new lines of inheritance. The last point was Sansa's personal requirement. The safety and well-being of the people of the North shall remain paramount, and if harm is done to them deliberately by the Crown, this alliance shall be considered forfeit. Aegon listened, hand on the hilt of a jeweled dagger that he did not draw. His expression was resolute. "I accept these terms," he said, when Maester Wolkan finished reading, "and I offer my own vow. Should I betray them, may the old gods and the new strike me down. I will provide assurances in writing, sealed by my personal sigil." At that, a tiny measure of relief wove through Sansa's heart. This was the moment. If she agreed, her life would change irrevocably. The North's future might be bound to a Targaryen. And yet, if she refused, the North might face war on multiple fronts. She looked at the solemn faces around her, then turned to Aegon. "Then, let it be done. I will marry you, Prince Aegon." There was a hum of tension releasing in the room, as though a string had been pulled taut, until it almost snapped. Aegon's eyes flickered with something like gratitude, and he inclined his head. "Thank you. I promise I will not betray that trust." They decided the ceremony would take place in the godswood, under the heart tree, in the presence of the old gods, partly to honor the North's traditions, partly to weave the marriage into the very roots of Winterfell. The next days became a flurry of preparation. Seamstresses altering dresses, stonemasons cleaning the walkways of ice, servants dusting every corner. Ravens were sent out to proclaim the betrothal. Some lords chose to linger for the wedding. Others departed swiftly, presumably to spread the news or to weigh their own loyalties. On the morning of the wedding, the sky dawned in a shock of pale rose and gold. It was as if the winter sun itself bestowed a rare blessing. The courtyard was swept clean. Evergreens were draped around doorways, a gentle echo of life amidst the snow. Sansa stood in her old bedchamber, the very same that had once been her mother's. Her reflection in the small looking-glass revealed a woman dressed in a gown of shimmering silver with a cloak of snow-white velvet. The fur trim at her collar caught the light. A silver direwolf clasp held the cloak in place at her throat, a gift from Arya. Though her heart pounded like a war drum, she tried to keep her bearing poised. She had been in wedding garb before, under circumstances both horrifying and heartbreaking. Memories of King's Landing pulled at her, threatening to unmoor her. But no, that was a different girl, a different time. She was Lady of Winterfell now, forging a path for the North. She stepped into the godswood alone. The crowd was gathered in a wide circle around the ancient heart tree, with its red leaves and solemn face. Snow drifted softly, settling upon cloaks of the lords and ladies in attendance. A hush blanketed them at her arrival. Only the soft murmur of the weirwood branches moving in the breeze punctuated the silence. Aegon stood waiting, dressed in a dark outfit trimmed with crimson, a three-headed dragon embroidered subtly on his breast. He wore a cloak of black fur. His eyes met hers with a steady calm that did not waver. Between them stood Arya, who had taken it upon herself to speak the traditional words on Sansa's behalf. An echo of an older custom when father or brother might stand for the bride. It felt strangely apt that Arya, who had endured so much, would be the one to pass Sansa into this new chapter. Arya's face was unreadable, but as Sansa drew near, she heard her sister's quiet voice. "Who comes before the old gods this day?" Arya asked in the formal words. "Sansa, of House Stark, Lady of Winterfell," she replied, hearing the echo of her own voice bounce beneath the weirwood canopy. "And who comes to claim her?" Arya asked. "Aegon of House Targaryen," he answered, his voice carrying in the cold air. Arya's gaze shifted between them. Sansa wondered what her sister was feeling, but Arya gave no visible clue. She continued, "Lady Sansa, do you take this man?" Sansa drew a slow breath, feeling the watchful eyes upon her. Lords of the North, her people, uncertain but hopeful. And she felt the old gods watching too, through the carved face of the heart tree. "I take him," she said, her voice steady. Arya nodded, turning to Aegon. "And do you swear to honor her and keep her, to share in her burdens, to protect the North as your own?" Aegon's eyes never left Sansa's. "I do so swear." There in the godswood, with a hush so profound that even the crows on the branches seemed to still, Sansa Stark and Aegon Targaryen clasped hands. Then they sealed their vows with a kiss. It was brief, almost chaste, but she felt the press of his lips, the warmth of him. The old gods bore witness. When they pulled apart, the circle of attendees lifted a soft cheer, uncertain but slowly growing. From somewhere near the edge, Lord Manderly let out a hearty cry of approval, joined by others. The wedding feast followed, a subdued but earnest affair in the great hall. Tables groaned with roasted boar, winter vegetables, hot bread and pies. Mulled wine flowed freely. Minstrels played soft tunes, though not the southern ballads. Sansa had chosen northern music, a bit starker but resonant. She sat at the high table, Aegon by her side, and wore an expression of composed gratitude as lords came to congratulate them. Even Arya, after some time and the coaxing of a few well-wishers, offered a small embrace to Sansa. Then she turned to Aegon and said, "Do right by her, or I'll put an arrow in your eye." She said it lightly, but her eyes hinted that it was no idle threat. Aegon only inclined his head, replying respectfully, "I have no intention of earning your wrath, Lady Arya." Eventually, as tradition dictated, they left the feast for the bedchamber, amid cheers and wolf whistles. Sansa's cheeks warmed. In northern weddings, it was custom for the bride and groom to be escorted halfway by torchlight. But she had insisted on modesty. And so they disappeared quietly down the corridor, flanked only by a few unspeaking guards, who then withdrew to leave them alone at the chamber doors. Inside, a gentle fire crackled, casting flickering light on the old stone walls. The bed was layered with thick quilts. Sansa felt the swirl of anticipation and anxiety. She remembered too many nights of dread. Her wedding to Tyrion, the horrors of Joffrey's court, the forced marriage to Ramsay Bolton. She tried to steady herself, reminding her body that she was safe now, that this was a choice. Aegon seemed to sense her unease. He closed the door softly and turned to her, moving slowly, mindful of the delicate moment. Carefully, he lifted a hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. "We needn't rush," he said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet chamber. I know what you have endured, at least in part. I would sooner share your trust before we share a bed in the truest sense." "Neptune." She exhaled, a tremulous relief washing through her. "Thank you," she whispered. Yes, I'd like that." He bowed his head. "Shall I stir the fire? It's growing cold." "Yes, please." And so they spent their first night of wedlock side by side, fully clothed, talking in hushed tones as the flames danced. He told her of the half-remembered days of his youth, of living across the narrow sea, never staying in one place too long, always fearing assassins. He spoke with lingering grief of John Connington, the man who claimed to have been his father's friend, who tried to shield him from the dangers that dogged him. Sansa, in turn, spoke of her father, mother, and brothers, of the day everything changed when King Robert came to Winterfell, how that single event shattered the course of her life. The night deepened and still they talked, forging the faint outlines of a bridge between two battered hearts. By dawn, Sansa realized she had dozed off on his shoulder. The fire had burned low. He was still awake, gazing into the embers. Feeling her stir, he turned to offer a gentle smile, and for the first time, she found herself smiling back. It was tenuous, this new bond, but in that fragile morning light, she felt a small bud of hope. The following week saw a shift in how the Northmen regarded the Targaryen presence. Now that he was wed to their lady, Aegon shared more openly about his plans for the Iron Throne. He had mustered allies in the Stormlands and Dorne, though the latter was still tenuous after the tragedies that befell House Martell. Some in the Reach quietly supported him as well, those who had grown weary of Lannister rule. Yet to truly claim the throne, he would need to wrest control of King's Landing from Cersei Lannister, and any who stood with her. The question loomed, would the North march with him? Sansa met in council with Aegon and the lords. Some were hesitant. "We've bled enough for southern thrones," Lord Glover said flatly, echoing the sentiment of many. "We're not your stepping stone to power, Targaryen or not." Aegon listened, acknowledging the complaint, and then offered reason. "The war is not just in the south. If we do not deal with Cersei and the chaos that follows, it will inevitably spread. The Lannisters, Greyjoys, or some other usurper might come north for retribution, once they settle their battles. Is it not better to face the threat on our own terms?" Lord Manderley stroked his double chin. "The prince has a point. The wars of the south have a habit of crawling up the neck." Sansa watched as the conversation turned to logistics, to strategies, to alliances. She understood all too well the precariousness of the realm. The North was still rebuilding from its own ravages, crops, fortifications, trust. But as Lady of Winterfell, she also knew that ignoring the conflicts south of Moat Cailin wouldn't protect them forever. A unified realm might stand a better chance of long-term peace, and the North would hold a respected place if its lady were queen consort. When at last a plan began to form, a plan that involved marching south with a portion of the northern forces, Sansa felt the old anxieties swirling in her stomach. But she also felt something else. A sense that, for once, she was steering events rather than being tossed about by them. She stood next to Aegon, who listened to her counsel on the temperament of various houses, on how best to approach the Vale, or which lords might be swayed through certain gestures. The north was her territory. The Vale was her mother's homeland. She had a vantage no Targaryen from across the sea could fully comprehend. She found it oddly empowering. During those planning sessions, she noticed Aegon's subtle deference to her in matters of the north, as though he recognized her domain. He did not attempt to bulldoze her opinions or posture as an omniscient commander. It was a stark contrast to men like Joffrey, who had reveled in power. Slowly, that stiff edge of caution she carried around him began to melt. She still carried her wariness like a well-worn cloak, but she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, this union could be something other than a nightmare. Days blended into weeks, and the time came to depart Winterfell. The plan called for Aegon to move south at the head of a combined force of Targaryen loyalists, those who had quietly made their way north to join him, and the Northmen who volunteered under the banners of various lords. Sansa would travel with them, as both queen consort in all but coronation, and as a voice for the north. Her presence would also signal legitimacy for Aegon's cause. The morning they set out was bright but cold, a pale sun glinting off the snowy fields. Sansa stood by the stables, wearing a traveling cloak of thick gray wool lined with fur. Aegon approached with 2 horses, handing her the reins of a dappled mare. "Are you ready, my lady?" he asked, his tone gentle but resolute. She nodded, looking past him at the columns of men forming in the courtyard. The wind whipped at banners displaying both the direwolf of Stark and the 3-headed dragon of Targaryen, a sight that might have seemed impossible mere months ago. "As ready as one can be," she answered. Arya came to bid them farewell, though Sansa could see the restless energy in her sister's eyes. "I'd go with you if I thought it wouldn't end with me wanting to put needles in half those southern lords," Arya said. But her voice was warm enough as she embraced Sansa. "Write to me. I'll hold Winterfell until you return." Sansa clung to that hug, remembering how they had parted ways so long ago, in anger and misunderstanding. "Thank you, Arya. Take care of our home." With that, they mounted, and the gates of Winterfell opened wide. Sansa cast a glance back at the ancient towers, their stone faces etched in her memory. A swirl of emotions churned within her: pride, sadness, yearning. She had lived through so many changes here. Now she was leaving once more, but not as a frightened captive or a powerless pawn. She was leaving as the Lady of Winterfell, a Stark of the North, and a Targaryen consort, riding to shape the fate of a kingdom. The march south was slow but steady, a caravan of men, horses, and supply wagons trudging through the snow-laden roads. Sansa and Aegon led the main column with the retinues of several northern houses. She found herself riding alongside him for hours each day. They spoke of strategy, of the southern lords they might encounter, but also of smaller things: food, music, glimpses of the landscape. At night, they made camp. Tents lined the fields. Fires crackled, men told stories and drank ale. Sansa often found herself in a larger command tent with Aegon, the lords, and their advisors, discussing the next day's route. When it came time for sleep, they shared a tent of their own. Sometimes they continued the same routine as their wedding night, simply talking in hushed tones, forging a deeper bond of trust. Other nights, they found themselves tangled in cautious, tender intimacy. It was not always easy for Sansa to surrender those old fears, but Aegon never pressed her. He was patient, and in that patience she found a path to closeness. They passed Moat Cailin, those haunted ruins that guarded the neck, and pressed onward, leaving the deep snow behind for the soggy marshlands. Slowly, the terrain began to shift. The air grew less biting. The southern roads were in disrepair in many places, testament to the wars that had ravaged these lands. Yet the combined forces advanced methodically. Word spread of their approach, and some of the smaller houses sent out envoys to greet or question them. Aegon answered them diplomatically, reminding them that House Targaryen had once united the Seven Kingdoms, and he aimed to restore stability. At Sansa's side, he introduced her as Lady of Winterfell and his consort, a figure bridging the chasm between North and South. Some lords were skeptical, but many were intrigued by such a union. Finally, they approached the region of the Vale. Though nominally allied to the north via Lady Sansa's kinship with House Tully and House Arryn, the Vale had become wary of external entanglements. Since Littlefinger's downfall and the reassertion of control by the Lords Declarant, the Vale had largely stayed out of the wars, recovering in relative isolation. Sansa, however, carried the memory of her Aunt Lysa's control over the Eyrie, as well as Petyr Baelish's manipulations. It had not been a happy chapter in her life. Yet, she had blood ties here. She decided they must attempt to secure the Vale's support. A gathering was arranged at a minor castle near the Vale's borders. The local lord, one of the more open-minded among the Lords Declarant, agreed to host the meeting. Sansa entered the hall on Aegon's arm, her posture poised. The Vale lords rose, looking at them with curiosity. She saw familiar sigils, the Falcon of Arryn, the Royce runes, the Belmore bells, the Grafton towers. Memories surfaced of her early childhood visits to the Eyrie. She remembered her mother telling her how the Vale was the safest place in all the Seven Kingdoms, protected by the mountains. Protected, but also isolated. Sansa greeted them graciously, relying on the courtesies her mother had taught her. She wore her hair in a simple northern braid, but she also wore a silver circlet gifted by Aegon. She introduced her husband as the rightful heir to House Targaryen, acknowledging the controversies but urging them to listen. Aegon, for his part, spoke of reuniting the realm in the face of the Lannister tyranny and the fracturing of power. "I do not come to your gates with fire and blood," he said, echoing his father's words in a twist, but with a hand extended in alliance. "We must move forward, away from endless strife." Some of the Vale lords remained unconvinced. Lord Jon Royce especially had never been one to trust Targaryens lightly. House Royce remembered the ancient days of the Andals, the proud heritage of the first men in the Vale. But he and the others listened. Sansa stepped forward to speak. "My lords, the Vale has always been dear to my family. My mother, Catelyn Tully, was fostered here under Lady Lysa Arryn. I spent a portion of my own life in the Eyrie. I know how your knights and your fortresses kept peace while the rest of the realm tore itself apart. But we are past the time when isolation can keep us safe. If the wars continue, if chaos spreads, the Vale will not remain untouched forever. I ask you now to stand beside us. Not for conquest, but to ensure a stable future for every kingdom." The conversation carried on late into the night with practical matters addressed: troop numbers, supply lines, the potential threat of House Lannister rallying mercenaries from across the sea. Bit by bit, the Vale lords' stance shifted from outright neutrality to tentative cooperation. The presence of Sansa, the last known Stark daughter who was once in their care, weighed heavily. By dawn, they pledged to at least keep the roads open, to allow safe passage, and to consider joining a combined host if certain conditions were met. From there, the Targaryen Stark host pushed further south. They bypassed Harrenhal, still rumored to be in partial ruin, and made for Riverrun, the seat of House Tully. This was a place of deep personal meaning for Sansa, the homeland of her mother. The Riverlands were also a land ravaged by war. Houses had turned on each other, the Lannisters had burned villages, and the Freys had committed atrocities at the twins. But with the Freys now greatly diminished, some said the twins were haunted after Arya Stark's infamous retribution, the region had begun to reorganize under a new generation of local lords. When Sansa and Aegon approached Riverrun, they found the castle gates open, the Tully banner, trout on a red and blue field, flapping in the breeze. Edmure Tully, her uncle, greeted them in the courtyard, his hair now streaked with gray. He embraced Sansa, tears in his eyes at the sight of his niece, grown into a regal woman in northern furs and Targaryen silver. She felt a pang in her heart for the family lost. Her mother, Robb, all the hopes that had once been pinned on a stark Tully future. Over supper in Riverrun's hall, Edmure questioned Aegon politely but persistently. "I've seen enough war," her uncle said. "The Riverlands have seen enough. But if you can offer peace, real peace, we might have reason to stand with you. Still, the Lannisters might not let go of the throne lightly. Nor will their allies." Say. Aegon admitted it would likely require a confrontation. But it need not be a repeat of the last war's devastation, he insisted. If we can break the Lannister hold quickly, by storming King's Landing or forcing a surrender, the realm might avoid another protracted conflict. Privately, Sansa worried about the notion of storming King's Landing, recalling all too well the bloodshed that had occurred when the capital was taken in Robert's rebellion. But if a swift strike prevented a longer siege, perhaps it was the lesser evil. Over the days of their stay at Riverrun, Edmure agreed to send a contingent of Riverlands knights to join the cause. If the Targaryen host proved capable of pressing close to King's Landing, and the people saw Aegon as a viable alternative, it might trigger a quick resolution. The march resumed. Each day brought the combined forces closer to the heart of the realm. Sansa felt the weather grow milder, the snows receding behind them. She also felt the chill of anticipation seep into her bones. Rumors reached them: Cersei Lannister clinging to power in the Red Keep, Euron Greyjoy controlling the seas with iron-born pirates, the Tyrell remnants in the Reach uncertain after the destruction of Highgarden. The entire realm seemed to be in flux, and here she was, at the side of a man who might become its king. It was not lost on her that their progress had been relatively unchallenged so far. The Lannisters had neither marched north to meet them nor set traps in the fields. Either they were too weak to do so, or they had something else in mind. But as they drew nearer the Crown Lands, a sense of foreboding accompanied the strategic optimism. One evening in the war tent, as maps lay spread across a broad wooden table, Sansa stood side by side with Aegon. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the canvas walls. Lords from the north, the Vale and the Riverlands, discussed how to best approach King's Landing. Some advocated a siege, encircling the city and starving it out. Others urged an immediate assault to catch Cersei unprepared. The discussion was tense, voices rising, men jabbing fingers at the map. Sansa leaned over the table, weighing the arguments. "A siege could draw out for months," she said quietly, "and many innocents might suffer within the city walls. But a direct assault risks high casualties among our own as well as the small folk inside." Ser Jaime Lannister's name came up, once the head of Cersei's armies, but rumored to have broken with her long ago. No one knew his fate for certain. Euron's Iron Fleet was also a concern, though they primarily threatened from the sea. Eventually, Aegon raised a hand. "We must be decisive," he said, "but not reckless. If we can slip a force into the city, rally the populace, perhaps a larger battle might be avoided." He looked at Sansa, considering her carefully. "I will not shed innocent blood the way the Mad King once threatened to do. The city will not burn." Sansa noted the earnestness in his eyes. "I believe you," she whispered, and then more firmly to the room, "We will plan carefully. No rash attacks that could cost the realm its future." In the nights that followed, as the host made its final approach, Sansa found sleep elusive. She often lay awake, listening to Aegon's steady breathing beside her, her mind flooded with possibilities. She had married him out of duty, out of a sense of forging a more stable future. But she no longer thought of him merely as a political partner. She found she cared about his well-being, about the ideals he claimed to stand for. Perhaps she even loved him, in a cautious, newly blossomed way. The realization sent an unfamiliar warmth through her, mingled with the persistent dread that everything could be lost if the final confrontation went poorly. At last, the spires of King's Landing appeared in the distance, rising over the horizon of rolling hills and scattered hamlets. Even from afar, the city's walls and the great bulk of the Red Keep were visible. Smoke hung in the sky, a city always alive with fires, kitchens, smithies, and countless people going about their business. The combined Northern and Targaryen host made camp a good distance away, near the Blackwater Rush. Scouts reported that the city was on edge with Lannister banners still flying, though the gold cloaks who patrolled the walls seemed fewer than before. Sansa stood on a slight rise, looking toward the city she had once known too well. She could almost taste the dusty air, remember the stench of flea bottom, the grandeur of the great sept, though that sept was no more, destroyed by wildfire under Cersei's rule. She recalled the Red Keep's corridors where she had been both pawn and prisoner. Now here she was, a stark Targaryen bride, come to see the capital taken by a different, rightful claim. Her heart pounded with a sense of destiny. Aegon rode up beside her. "Tomorrow at dawn," he said, "we will move closer to the gates." She nodded, swallowing. "And what will we do if they refuse to open them?" He exhaled. "We have engineers who can breach the walls, but I'd rather not. The cost in lives. Let's hope it won't come to that. We'll demand their surrender first. If the people see we're here to liberate them from Cersei's tyranny, we might sway them." Sansa remembered a different day, when she had stood on the walls with Joffrey, forced to watch her father's execution. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "I pray we can spare them more bloodshed," she said softly. True to plan, dawn found the host assembling, forming ranks that stretched along the green plains outside the city walls. Trumpets sounded a clear note over the hush of thousands of men. Banners fluttered, wolves and dragons, falcons and trouts. Sansa, mounted on her mare, felt a tremor of anxiety as they approached within shouting distance of the gates. Soldiers in Lannister livery lined the battlements, spears in hand. A hush fell. Then a herald stepped forward, voice echoing across the space. "In the name of Aegon Targaryen, trueborn son of Rhaegar Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, we call upon the city of King's Landing to open its gates. Surrender, and no harm shall come to the small folk. Lord or lady who stands with Queen Cersei Lannister will face justice, but those who lay down arms shall receive mercy." Silence. For a long moment, no response came. Sansa glanced at Aegon, who sat tall upon his stallion, expression stoic. Then, with a low rumble, the massive gates began to open. A single rider emerged, carrying a white banner. The rider approached, flanked by a few gold cloaks. Stopping within earshot, the messenger announced, "We request parley. Her Grace Queen Cersei Lannister invites Prince Aegon Targaryen and Lady Sansa Stark to discuss terms in the Red Keep." Unease swept through the ranks. Sansa felt her muscles tense. Was this a trap? But a parley might prevent a siege. She looked at Aegon, who nodded. "Very well. We will come with a small retinue, no more than 10 men." They arranged it swiftly. Aegon chose a handful of trusted knights. Sansa selected Brienne of Tarth, who had arrived days prior, carrying a letter from the Vale, and a few other loyal guards. Together, they rode through the open gates into the city. The streets were quiet, lined with curious onlookers. Sansa's gaze swept over familiar corners, though many buildings had been damaged by war or looting. Fleabottom was as squalid as ever, but its people stared with a spark of hope at the passing column, as if they yearned for anyone to deliver them from the uncertain tyranny of Cersei. Aegon's three-headed dragon, sigil hung from the lances carried by his retinue, and for the first time in many years, the Targaryen symbol reappeared on the streets of King's Landing. They reached the Red Keep's courtyard, where Lannister soldiers lined up in uneasy formation. Sansa dismounted, her heart thrumming in her chest. She had once walked these stones as a frightened girl. Now, she did so as a woman who had survived. They were escorted through the corridors, up the grand steps, into the throne room. There, upon the Iron Throne, sat Cersei Lannister, her posture ramrod straight, her golden hair coiled in an austere style. Her eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Sansa felt a chill ripple through her. The last time she had stood in this chamber, Cersei had watched her with thinly veiled contempt. Now, Sansa stood tall by Aegon's side, wearing the colors of House Stark and House Targaryen. She refused to flinch under that gaze. "So," Cersei said, her voice echoing in the hall. It was quieter than it had been in her days of absolute power, but no less dangerous. "Rhaegar's spawn returns from the ashes with a Stark girl in tow. How quaint." Aegon inclined his head with guarded politeness. "My father was the rightful heir, and I carry that lineage. Your reign ends now, Cersei. Surrender, and you will be treated with mercy." Cersei's lips curled. Mercy. She rose from the throne, descending 2 steps. The clang of her slippers on the iron steps reverberated. Where was my mercy when all turned against House Lannister? When Daenerys Targaryen came with her dragons? When the 7 kingdoms decided my family was the source of all evil? She waved a hand, dismissive. I still have allies. Euron Greyjoy has not forsaken me. My men remain loyal. Why should I yield to a pretender with silver hair and no dragons? Aegon's jaw tightened. Because the realm is tired of war. The lords of the north, the Vale, the Riverlands, all stand with us. Surrender now, and the city will be spared. The small folk need not die for your pride. Cersei's eyes slid to Sansa, a sneer etched on her face. And you, little dove? No, I suppose you're not so little anymore. You come back to the cage you once sang in, but now you think you hold the keys. She let out a low, humorless laugh. You're more a fool than I thought. Perhaps the North stands behind you, but how quickly they'll flee when Lannister gold buys mercenaries from the free cities. How many sellswords can the North match? Sansa met her gaze unflinchingly. If you truly believe the sellswords will save you, you're more desperate than I realized. The realm has seen through your empty reign. The city starves. The people suffer. Your gold is running out, Cersei. You can end this now with your life intact. Then through when? For an instant, fury flashed across the queen's face. Her mask slipped. She turned her gaze to her guard. The tension in the throne room was palpable. Sansa felt Brienne shift behind her, hand near her sword hilt. Aegon's knights were equally poised. This could end in a bloodbath within seconds. But Cersei stayed her hand, a calculating look replacing her rage. You come demanding my surrender. Yet I see no unstoppable force behind you. My walls still stand. My men still hold them. Even if the city despises me, I have ways of controlling them. The Red Keep can withstand a siege. Dorne? It cannot withstand the entire realm united, Aegon said calmly. You stand alone, Cersei. The Tyrells are gone, the Martells are scattered. The Baratheons follow their own claim. And your own brother, where is he, fighting for you? I see him not. You have only Euron, and the Ironborn care for nothing but their own spoils. You will not hold the throne. Cersei stared at him, at Sansa, and Sansa noticed a flicker of uncertainty in the queen's eyes. A cornered lion might still lash out, but even a lion knows when the huntsmen have them surrounded. Cersei's shoulders tensed. She glanced around at the throne room, at the fraying edges of her guard. Then she spat. I will die before I bend the knee to a Targaryen. Aegon exhaled. Then you sentence this city to war. He turned, gesturing to Sansa. They walked out, their retinue close behind, leaving Cersei trembling with rage upon the Iron Throne. Outside in the courtyard the tension was thick. Sansa and Aegon mounted swiftly. As they rode back through the city, a hush fell over the streets, the small folk sensing that the parley had failed. When they reached their camp, the lords gathered urgently, and Aegon relayed what had transpired. She will not yield. We must prepare for battle. The next dawn, the city awoke to find that the Targaryen Stark forces had surrounded King's Landing. Catapults were positioned. Archers lined the ridges. Men took up positions near the gates. Drums sounded an ominous beat. Sansa stood amidst the command tents, overseeing the supply lines, ensuring wounded could be cared for. Her heart pounded as she heard the first call of horns, announcing the final choice for the defenders. Surrender or fight? Within hours, chaos erupted. The gates remained closed, but pockets of city dwellers, hungry and desperate, revolted against the gold cloaks. A portion of the city guard turned their cloaks, opening a postern gate from within. A hastily assembled group of Lannister loyalists tried to stop them, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Aegon seized the opportunity. The loyal northern knights poured in through the opening, shouting for the crowd to stay clear. The people parted like water for them, some cheering, some terrified. Fighting broke out in the streets, brief but bloody. Lannister guards and any remaining sellswords loyal to Cersei clashed with the approaching forces. Sansa, guarded by a small contingent, remained outside the direct fray, praying it would not devolve into a slaughter. Columns of armed men moved toward the Red Keep, led by Aegon himself, astride a warhorse. The gold cloaks around the castle walls hesitated. Many threw down their arms rather than die for a queen they no longer believed in. Some tried to hold the gatehouse. They were swiftly overrun. Sansa's breath caught as she witnessed the final surge toward the heart of the Red Keep. Shouts of victory and screams of pain mingled. She urged her horse closer, flanked by Brienne and others. When at last the gate to the Red Keep fell, the defenders scattered. The courtyard was littered with the dead and dying. Aegon dismounted, his sword bloody, and rushed inside. Sansa followed, her senses almost numb to the chaos, her heart pounding with adrenaline and dread. At the base of the grand staircase leading to the throne room, they found Cersei's last stand. She was surrounded by a handful of Lannister men, her face twisted in fury. She clutched a small crossbow, eyes wild. The moment she saw Aegon, she fired. The bolt hissed through the air. It grazed the edge of his armor, drawing a thin line of blood across his upper arm. Furious, Cersei tried to reload, but the men behind her were already disarmed, overpowered by Aegon's knights. Aegon, wincing from the wound, advanced. "Yield," he commanded, voice ringing through the hall. Cersei spat at him, eyes flicking to Sansa with venom. "Never." Sansa, her pulse roaring, took a step forward. "Please, don't make this uglier than it must be. Think of your child." She remembered the rumors that Cersei might still be pregnant. Or perhaps that child was lost already. The details were uncertain. But Sansa saw no regret in her face, only defiance. The queen let out a bitter laugh. "You pity me? The sweet little dove has grown claws." She sneered, raising the crossbow again. But Aegon's knight surged forward, wrenching it from her grasp. She let out a shrill scream, kicking, fighting, but to no avail. It was over. The Red Keep was taken. The city had fallen, not with a fiery cataclysm, but with pockets of violence and an uprising of small folk. Lannister banners were torn down, replaced by the direwolf and the three-headed dragon. In the days that followed, Aegon moved swiftly to restore order. The gold cloaks were reorganized under a new commander loyal to the Targaryen claim. Food stores were opened to feed the starving masses. The city, though battered, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Sansa took charge of organizing triage for the wounded and distributing supplies. She worked with the lords to set up a provisional council, ensuring that the city's needs were addressed. In those frantic days, she found little time to sleep, let alone dwell on the magnitude of what had happened. The realm had turned a monumental page. At last, a coronation was held in the Red Keep's throne room. Aegon Targaryen was crowned king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, protector of the realm. He knelt before a high septon summoned from Old Town to administer the vows. His hair shone silver in the torchlight as the crown, modeled after the one worn by Aegon the Conqueror, was placed on his head. People cheered. The hall echoed with roars of approval from lords who had long been waiting for a stable ruler. Then, it was Sansa's turn. The hush that fell was profound. She felt her knees tremble as she knelt before him, heart pounding. The high septon anointed her with holy oils, chanting the ancient words. Then Aegon stood, lifted a smaller crown wrought of silver and steel, one that bore the sigils of both Targaryen and Stark in a subtle design, and placed it gently on her head. "Rise, my queen," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. She rose, and a thunderous cheer erupted. She saw tears in Lord Manderley's eyes. Arya stood nearby, arms folded, but her lips curved in a tiny smile. Edmure Tully looked proud, clapping as fervently as any. The new king turned to face the assembled crowd, taking her hand in his. In that moment, Sansa felt the weight of the realm upon her shoulders, but it was a weight she chose to bear. She recalled all that had led her here, the naive girl who wanted songs and ballads, the frightened prisoner in King's Landing, the brutal captivity under the Boltons, the cunning she learned in the Vale, the leadership she embraced at Winterfell. Now she stood as queen consort beside a Targaryen king who bore no madness, only a cautious hope for a better realm. The journey had been unimaginable, but here she was. That evening, when the feasting and revelry finally eased, they withdrew to their private chambers in the Red Keep. It was the same keep that had once held her in terror, but now it had become the seat of her queenship. Aegon poured them wine. The moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the city below. For a while, they sipped in silence, leaning against the balcony rail, surveying the torchlit streets. The scars of war still lingered, but the city seemed calmer now, as if waiting to see what kind of king and queen would rule it. Aegon turned to her, brushing a stray curl from her temple. "We did it," he said softly. "Or, at least, we've begun it. The real work comes now, healing, rebuilding, guiding the realm toward unity." She nodded, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and determination. "Yes, the realm is fractured, and your reign will not be without challenges, but we stand a chance. We have the North, the Vale, the Riverlands, and others may follow in time." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "And I have you, Sansa, my queen." She closed her eyes, letting that word wash over her. Queen Capital. Not the kind of queen she had once daydreamed about. No. A far more complex role, grounded in scars and tempered by trials. She felt his warmth, and for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to believe in the future. She opened her eyes and found his gaze. "Yes," she whispered. "You have me." Then, with a gentle tilt of her chin, she pressed her lips to his. In that kiss, she tasted the salt of tears and the lingering sweetness of wine, the promise of a new reign, a new page turned. Outside, a breeze stirred across the city, rattling the palm trees in the distant gardens of the Red Keep. The dragons of old were gone, but their legacy remained in the silver-haired king who had reclaimed his birthright, and in the stark woman who stood at his side. Far away in the frosty heart of the north, the old gods might have been watching through the weirwood trees, witnessing the forging of an alliance that spanned from the land of snow to the seat of dragons. The ghosts of their fathers, and all those lost in the wars, might have found a measure of solace in this union. For a moment, beneath that moonlit sky, the realms of ice and fire breathed as one. Night hung quietly over the Red Keep, draping the city in a hush that felt like the held breath before dawn. Sansa stood at the balcony once more, taking in the candle-lit sprawl of King's Landing. Even at this late hour, she heard distant murmurs of voices, the shuffle of tired feet, the low bark of dogs hunting scraps. Thousands of people, so many stories, and all of them now looked to her and Aegon. Only days had passed since the coronation, yet it felt like a lifetime. She turned from the parapet and found Aegon behind her in their private solar papers and parchments spread across the table. He had shed his crown for the evening, placing it carefully on a side table, as though even the symbol of power felt too heavy for him to wear all the time. He rubbed a hand over his eyes, clearly fatigued. "There's word from the Reach," he said when he noticed her attention. A few minor lords who once owed fealty to House Tyrell plan to dispatch envoys. Some are wary, others hopeful, but it is progress. Sansa inclined her head in acknowledgement. "We'll welcome them. The aftermath of war weighs on everyone. If we can show good faith, we might prevent further bloodshed." And now. He gave a thin smile and set the letter aside. "Your words carry weight. Ever since the coronation, I see how they watch you. The small folk, the lords, they speak of the Northern Queen with both curiosity and respect. They remember your captivity here, the horrors you endured. That you've returned to rule beside me, it stirs people's hearts. Even the ones who remain cautious about a Targaryen king find it difficult to fault the Lady of Winterfell." "Nay." She walked to him, rested her palm on his shoulder, and felt the tension beneath his muscles. "I never sought that sympathy, but I'll use what I have to ensure the realm doesn't fracture again." She allowed her hand to linger. "You work too hard." He pressed his hand over hers. "It's only that we stand at the start of a very long road. So many matters need attending. Cersei's loyalists must be dealt with. Not all can be shown mercy without scrutiny. Some were complicit in atrocities. We must see to punishments for the ringleaders, but we can't simply kill every Lannister bannerman. We need their labor and loyalty to rebuild. And then there's the question of Euron Greyjoy. We've received no clear intelligence of his current whereabouts. He may be gathering ships, or he may have fled these waters. We have to be ready. Nenner. Sansa pulled up a chair and settled beside him. We'll take it one step at a time. My mother used to say you cannot harness an entire river in a single day. You build dams and canals in careful increments. She traced a finger over the map. You have your allies in the Stormlands, some in Dorne, and the North stands strong. As for the people in King's Landing, treat them justly, feed them, give them a sense of hope, and they will defend you should another threat arise. Aegon exhaled. It all sounds so simple the way you say it. She offered the barest hint of a smile. It isn't, but we don't have to do it alone. Reaching for a carafe of wine, she poured 2 cups. You might not have dragons, but you have a coalition of houses. Lean on them. He nodded, took the wine, and brought it to his lips. She studied him, the faint circles beneath his eyes, the determined set of his jaw. She understood the weight he carried because it mirrored her own. Yet, in the short time since their wedding, something new had taken root between them, an understanding that they did not have to face these burdens in solitude. The knowledge was both daunting and strangely comforting. She finished her own wine and rose. Come, she murmured, extending a hand. Enough for tonight. Rest is as important as strategy. He stared at the papers a moment longer, before giving a quiet chuckle. Yes, my queen, he said, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. He took her hand, and together they left the solar, shutting the door on the unread letters. The next morning, dawn broke in pale gold and lavender across the city's rooftops. From her bedchamber window, Sansa watched the sunrise paint the horizon, revealing the patchwork of King's Landing in its early bustle. Somewhere below, bakers would be kneading dough, washerwomen fetching water. A small but steady improvement had come from their immediate efforts. The worst of the food shortages was abating as they distributed grain stored in the Red Keep's granaries. She knew the supplies wouldn't last forever, and rebuilding farmland in the Crownlands would be essential. But for the moment, at least, fewer families went hungry. Sansa dressed in a gown of muted grays and blues, in homage to her Stark heritage, though the neckline was embroidered with discreet 3-headed dragons that paid tribute to her new station. She braided her hair simply. Though she was queen consort, she found she preferred the northern practicality in her style. A lady-in-waiting, a young woman named Elise from a minor Crownlands house, helped her with the final ties. Sansa had insisted on a smaller personal retinue, shunning the extravagances she remembered from Joffrey's court. A queen did not need a host of fluttering sycophants. She needed only those who could be trusted. She made her way down the corridors, pausing briefly to greet a handful of guards. Some had served under the Lannisters. They bowed in stiff respect, still adjusting to the new rule. She greeted them by name when she could, forging small connections. In the great hall, servants set long tables with fresh bread, boiled eggs, and slices of salted fish for the morning meal. At the high table, Aegon was already seated, speaking softly with Lord Manderley and Edmure Tully. The hush in their voices suggested they'd been discussing official matters before her arrival. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat beside Aegon. She noticed a bandage around his left upper arm, the wound from Cersei's crossbow. He moved carefully, still favoring that side. It wasn't serious, but it would be tender for days yet. Lord Manderley gave a jovial bow of his head, though his eyes were somber. "Your Grace, I was just telling His Majesty about the tidings from White Harbor. The city recovers from the winter, but the shipping lanes remain quiet. We've had a few ships carrying goods from Bravos, though, so there's promise." Edmure Tully rubbed the stubble on his chin. "The Riverlands are in better shape than at the height of the war, but so many villages were burned, so many fields destroyed. It will be a hard slog back to prosperity. I'm heading back to Riverrun soon to oversee the planting." Sansa took a moment to pour herself tea, letting the fragrance of mint and chamomile soothe her senses. "We mustn't let the realm starve again. If we can coordinate shipments of seed and tools to the farmers, that would help. Perhaps our Bravosi contacts can extend credit, though I dislike the idea of more debt. We'll repay them by opening trade routes that have languished under years of turmoil. Damn is show. Edmure's eyes lit with cautious optimism. That's exactly what I was suggesting. My envoys are still waiting to hear from Bravos. They might lend coin at a fair rate if they believe the monarchy is stable. Aegon leaned back in his seat, rotating his injured shoulder slightly, as though testing it. The monarchy must prove it has staying power. Word of the wedding coronation has likely reached Essos, but we should send official letters to the Iron Bank, to the rulers of Lys, Pentos, Volantis. Let them see that King's Landing is no longer the seat of chaos. Messar. They spoke at length about the best ways to entice foreign trade. Then, before the conversation could end, a herald approached with a shallow bow. Your Graces, Sir Brienne of Tarth has arrived. She wishes to speak with you regarding a matter of some urgency. Sansa felt her chest tighten. Brienne's presence always reminded her of a promise of protection, but also of the restless state of the realm. Send her in, she said, and soon Brienne stepped forward, clad in her armor, helm tucked under her arm. She greeted them with her usual earnest bow. Your Graces, she said, I have word from the Crownlands villages. Several knights who once swore fealty to House Lannister have taken to brigandage on the Rosby Road. They harass travelers, seize supplies. The gold cloaks are too thinly spread to handle them effectively. Aegon's face hardened. We can't allow that. The countryside must be safe again. Do you have names, houses? Brienne nodded. They bear the sigil of House Dettings, among others, though who exactly leads them is unclear. They're calling themselves the Iron Sons of the Lion, which suggests some misguided loyalty to Cersei's cause. Villagers say they threaten to take back the throne for the rightful queen. They're about 50 in number, though the rumor is more gathered by the day. Bowen. Sansa's stomach twisted. The city might have fallen, but pockets of resistance would keep cropping up. We should dispatch a company of loyal knights to root them out. Better to deal with them quickly than let them grow and cause havoc. Brienne's face was resolute. I volunteer to lead them, Your Grace. With your permission, I'll see to it that the roads are made safe. No. Aegon nodded. Take whomever you need. We can spare a few knights from the city garrison. Let them see that order has returned, that lawless men cannot roam free, and bring the leaders back alive if you can. We'll make an example of them in a formal trial. Justice must be seen to be done properly. Justice must be seen to be done properly. Brienne bowed again. As you command, Your Majesty. Sansa offered her a grateful look. Thank you, Sir Brienne. May the gods watch over you. The knight departed, her steps echoing on the marble floor, and the tension in the air remained. Sansa could practically feel the weight of responsibility pressing upon them all. She glanced at Edmure and Lord Manderley. We'll show that we can govern justly. These brigands will not find support if the people trust their king. After the morning meal, Aegon and Sansa parted ways to attend to separate matters. She spent hours in the solar, meeting with master builders, healers, and representatives of the city's small folk. She listened to their concerns. Collapsed buildings that needed repairs, orphans in the streets, leftover stockpiles of wildfire hidden beneath the city from Cersei's mad schemes. That last point gave her pause. The memory of King's Landing nearly destroyed by wildfire in the past wars lurked ominously at the corner of her mind. She immediately ordered a thorough search of old tunnels and cellars, commanding any discovered caches to be reported at once. By midday, she felt her head throb with a dull ache. She dismissed her attendants and decided to walk through the Red Keep's gardens for a moment of peace. That garden had been neglected under Cersei's reign, its hedges overgrown, roses choked by weeds. Now, a few humble gardeners tried to coax it back to life. The sweet smell of turned earth hung in the air. As she wandered among the half-blooming roses, lost in thought, she almost didn't notice the shadow that fell across her path. She looked up to see Arya leaning against a pillar. Her sister had arrived in King's Landing only the day before, slipping into the city with minimal fanfare, as was her way. The sight of Arya in simple leathers, a short sword at her hip, warmed Sansa's heart. You're avoiding me, Arya said lightly, though her eyes held a teasing warmth. Sansa shook her head. Never. I've just been overwhelmed with council after council. Have you found a place to settle? Arya shrugged. I can sleep anywhere. But I took a room in the keep, near the guard tower. Smaller than your fancy queen's chambers, but it suits me. She paused, studying Sansa. You look tired. Sansa nearly laughed. That's because I am tired. Sitting on a throne. Well, beside a throne, turns out to be more exhausting than I imagined. I sometimes long for the quiet of Winterfell. Then let's go, Arya said with a half-smile, as though it were that simple. Leave this place. Let the Targaryen handle the crown. Sansa sighed and looked at the roses, their petals streaked with an early red. You know I can't do that. My duty is here now. And I chose this, Arya. Maybe not all of it. Maybe fate or the gods had a hand. But I chose to be queen consort. The North needs me to ensure that we're not overlooked or trampled in southern politics ever again. Ma'am? Arya was silent for a moment. Then she said, I don't begrudge you that. But I want you to be happy, not just dutiful. She stepped closer, and Sansa realized how much they'd both grown in different ways. Arya's face bore subtle scars from battles she never spoke of, and her eyes carried a wary glint that reminded Sansa of a lone wolf forever scanning the horizon. Sansa managed a small smile. I think I'm happier than I've been in a long while in spite of everything. Aegon is good. He listens. He tries. He's not a Joffrey or a Ramsay or even a Littlefinger. She paused. I'm beginning to care for him more deeply than I expected. Arya gave a quick, playful snort. Let's hope he deserves it. But if he ever betrays you... Yes, I know. You'll put an arrow in his eye. Sansa finished for her, rolling her eyes. I doubt you'll need to. He's not the type. Arya's expression softened. Then I'm glad. You deserve someone who stands beside you instead of stifling you. If he proves true, well, the new realm might have a chance. Then Pistolnero. They walked side by side through the overgrown paths, talking quietly of small things. The progress of the garden, the news from Winterfell. How Gendry Baratheon now oversaw the Stormlands. Sansa found it surreal that the little sister she had once bickered with over petty childhood annoyances was now her strongest ally and fiercest protector. The brutality of war had shaped them both, but it hadn't broken their bond. Later that afternoon, Sansa joined Aegon in the throne room, where they convened a hearing for minor lords who had come to pledge fealty or request pardons. The chamber still bore the marks of conflict, scorch marks from when wildfire exploded during the reign of the Mad Queen, cracks in the floor from past battles. Yet it bustled with the energy of a new dawn. House by house, they stepped forward. Some sought reconfirmation of titles, others offered resources in hopes of receiving royal favor. Aegon handled most of the formalities, but he often deferred to Sansa for matters concerning the North or the Vale. She listened carefully, offering measured responses. When a minor lord from the Vale approached to request a new garrison, Sansa quietly reminded him of the Vale's own resources and suggested that his people band together to rebuild roads. The crown will help, she said, but we cannot do all for you. Show me you're willing to put in the work, and we'll meet you halfway. Aegon nodded approval at her words. He had once told her that he admired her ability to blend practicality with compassion, a skill honed by her years of survival and leadership. Before, as a naive girl, she might have believed that lords acted out of nobility or courtesy. She now knew better. The line of petitioners ended with a final supplicant, a thin, gray-haired man in rough-spun attire. He did not look like a lord. He bowed low, trembling. Speak, Aegon said gently. The man's voice shook. Your graces, I represent the orphans of Flea Bottom. So many children lost parents in the fighting. We beg for relief. We have no coin, no means. If we could have any scrap of land to farm, or something to keep them from starving. Sansa's heart clenched. She remembered passing by Flea Bottom in a litter once, ignoring the suffering around her because she was too lost in her own illusions. Now, she would not ignore it. She looked at Aegon, then turned back to the man. We have stockpiles of grain. I will arrange for a portion to be distributed directly to Flea Bottom. And I'll appoint a steward to ensure that the orphans are fed and clothed, not only for a day, but for as long as necessary. We will find them places in the city orphanages or, if possible, good families who can care for them. The crown must protect its children. Noir. Tears glistened in the man's eyes. He bowed lower, pressing his forehead to the floor. Thank you, your graces. Thank you. Aegon dismissed him with words of quiet sympathy, and the throne room cleared. Servants hurried to prepare for the next official gathering, but Sansa and Aegon both stepped down from the dais, feeling drained. They exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The burdens of the realm were not theoretical. They had faces, voices, pleas. Aegon let out a breath. We'll do all we can, but the city's resources are finite. We'll need to rely on the surrounding regions for shipments of food. Let's hope the Riverrun's harvest is good this year. Sansa walked beside him as they exited into the corridor. We can issue incentives for farmers to bring their crops to King's Landing first before selling elsewhere. Guarantee fair prices, waive certain taxes. It may help. And if the orphans can be given some simple vocational training, in weaving or smithwork, they might become productive members of the city in time. Once, he slipped an arm around her shoulders in a gesture of weary affection. You see 100 steps ahead, Sansa. I only hope the realm gives us enough time to take them. They wandered the corridors until they came upon a small audience with Maester Gorman, who had arrived from Old Town to assist in reorganizing the royal archives. He was an older man, stooped with age but keen-eyed. He bowed deeply to Sansa and Aegon. Your Majesties, the library in the Red Keep is in disarray. Many volumes were lost or scattered during the wars. However, we've recovered some genealogical records that might be of interest, especially concerning House Targaryen's lineage. It may help solidify your claim, my king, if these documents are made known. Aegon nodded. I'll look at them. Have them preserved, any that can be salvaged. The realm's history is worth saving, even the painful parts. Sansa glanced at the dusty scrolls in Maester Gorman's arms. She recalled how knowledge could be a weapon or a shield, depending on who wielded it. We appreciate your work, Maester. The city needs its history to remember what's been done, both right and wrong. He bowed again and shuffled off, leaving them to continue on. They returned to the Solar, where they found a messenger waiting, a thin boy with anxious eyes, clutching a small sealed letter. Aegon broke the seal and scanned the contents, brow furrowing. Word from Gendry Baratheon, he said. Storm's End has had to fend off pirate raids on its coasts. Probably remnants of Euron's men. Aegon looked at Sansa Ty. He requests additional ships from the royal fleet. Sansa felt that tug of concern. We have so few ships ourselves, and the city's harbor defenses are still incomplete. But we can't leave the Stormlands vulnerable. Aegon lowered the letter. I'll send some ships, at least enough to help him hold the coast. If Euron's men are indeed behind these raids, it means the Ironborn remain a threat. We might need to reach out to the new leaders on the Iron Islands. I hear they've turned away from Euron's brutality, but I want confirmation. And so it went, crisis after crisis, each requiring delicate handling. The day stretched onward, the sun crossing the sky in a slow arc, casting creeping shadows across the city below. At last, as the color of evening flared in the west, they found a moment's pause. Aegon offered a weary grin. I propose we dine privately tonight. Just us. No councils, no lords, no petitions. Sansa's eyes lit with relief. I'd like that. But what about your new kingly obligations? She teased him gently with a raised eyebrow. He let out a soft laugh. They can wait a few hours. If the realm can't manage without us for one evening, we're doomed. They retreated to a smaller dining chamber near their apartments. The servants arranged a simple meal of roasted capon, buttered vegetables, and a pitcher of spiced wine. Warm candlelight flickered on the walls. Without the constant stream of courtiers and attendants, the silence felt almost luxurious. Halfway through the meal, Sansa caught herself smiling at Aegon's attempt to carve the capon with one hand. His bandaged arm made it awkward, but he insisted on doing it himself. She reached out to steady the platter. You'll wear out your shoulder, she chided softly. He laughed. Perhaps I should concede this chore. He handed her the knife, and she cut neat slices, passing them onto his plate. It wonderfully domestic, a small glimpse of what a normal life could be if they didn't wear crowns. They exchanged tales of small amusements: a guard who had tried to teach his horse to bow, a cook who swore she once fed the Dowager Queen Cersei a pie with extra pepper. The tension of the day ebbed. Afterward, they found themselves strolling the gallery of ancestral portraits, a corridor once dedicated to the Targaryen dynasty. Many of the frames lay empty or damaged, reminders of the city's violent past. At the far end hung a large portrait of Rhaegar Targaryen, half burnt around the edges. Aegon paused, staring at the idealized image of the father he never knew. The silver gold hair, the melancholy eyes. The fire had devoured half the painting's left side, so that Rhaegar's face seemed caught between life and ruin. Sansa watched Aegon's posture shift, the set of his shoulders stiffen. She rested a hand lightly on his arm, letting him know she was there if he needed comfort. "He looks noble in the painting," she murmured. "Stories say he was," Aegon said quietly. "He was also flawed. He made decisions that led to a brutal war. He might have had the best intentions, or been swept up in prophecy and love and honor. There are many versions of that tale. In the end, it cost him his life and cost the realm thousands more." "Damn," Sansa nodded. "We inherit the burdens of those who came before us, but we don't have to repeat their mistakes." His gaze traveled across the scorched paint. "Sometimes I wonder what he'd think of me, if he'd be proud or disappointed. He dreamed of a better realm, or so they say, but everything ended in ashes. I'd like to believe I can do better, that we can do better." Sansa squeezed his hand. "We will. This realm isn't the same as it was then. And you aren't your father any more than I am my mother or father. We carry them in us, but we shape our own destiny." He turned, meeting her gaze, and for a moment the flicker of torchlight illuminated the intensity in his eyes. "You always know the right thing to say." She lowered her lashes. "I only speak from my own scars." They resumed walking, the hush of the corridor broken only by their footsteps. Outside the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The city never slept, but at least in these private corridors, they could pretend for a time that they were simply two people, not the king and queen consort. At length, they returned to their chambers, where a low fire burned in the hearth. The day's worries settled between them in the hush, but Sansa found solace in Aegon's presence. In the gentle way he helped her unfasten the silver clasp at her throat. She turned to face him, feeling her pulse quicken. He bent to kiss her, soft and tentative at first, then with a deeper urgency that spoke of gratitude as much as desire. They clung to each other in the flickering firelight, letting the world slip away for a brief span of hours. When morning came, so did the next set of trials. Aegon had decreed that high-ranking officers of Cersei's regime would face a fair hearing in open court, with testimonies from witnesses. Sansa stood at his side in the throne room as the accused were brought forth. Most had surrendered at the fall of King's Landing. A few had been captured since. Their crimes ranged from extortion and torture to the burning of villages in the Crown Lands. Some pleaded ignorance, claiming they acted under orders. Others were defiant, insisting the rightful queen was Cersei. Sansa watched Aegon weigh each case carefully, refusing to execute men without compelling evidence of direct wrongdoing. However, those found guilty of egregious crimes were sentenced to execution. The city guard carried out the sentences in the yard before the Red Keep. It was a grim necessity, a reminder that justice must be served, no matter how heavy it weighed on the king's conscience. Sansa insisted on attending the first execution. She felt it her duty not to hide from the realities of power. A man named Sir Gaemon Darry had overseen the torture of suspected traitors in the dungeons, delighting in cruelty. When the headsman lifted the sword, Sir Gaemon's final screams echoed in her ears. She didn't flinch. She had witnessed more death in her life than any young noble lady should, but it still hollowed her chest. Aegon, beside her, stared grimly at the act. She saw him draw in a steadying breath when the deed was done. The man's headless body crumpled to the scaffold, blood staining the weathered boards. They returned inside, the hush around them almost tangible. Guards parted to allow them to pass. Sansa sensed the silent relief of the courtiers, who had worried the new king might be too lenient. But she also saw the fear in some eyes, a reminder that a crown could order death with only a word. Aegon said little as they walked through the corridor, but when they entered a small antechamber, he turned to Sansa. "I wish it didn't have to be like this," he murmured, voice tight. She reached up to brush her thumb across the lines etched in his brow. "So do I, but I remember my father's words. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. At least you faced him." His eyes flickered. "I didn't swing the sword myself. Part of me thinks I should have." "You hold the ultimate responsibility and you don't shy from it," she said gently. "That's enough. Your father might have played the harp. He might have read prophecies and believed in a better world, but he never got to see the consequences of leading armies. You do. You take them on your shoulders and you carry them." She paused. "The realm needs that, however painful." He nodded, letting out a slow breath. "Very well. We move forward then, one step at a time." They pressed on. In the weeks that followed, the streets of King's Landing became marginally safer. Aegon and Sansa's combined efforts to feed and protect the small folk bore fruit. Fewer beggars roamed the alleys, and the Gold Cloaks, restructured under a new commander, patrolled with renewed discipline. Lord Manderley returned north to handle White Harbor's affairs, leaving behind a solid contingent of Northmen to support the crown. Edmure Tully departed for Riverrun, determined to restore the Riverlands in time for a bountiful harvest. Word spread that lords from the Westerlands might soon arrive to negotiate. House Lannister's seat at Casterly Rock stood uncertain without a stable ruling figure. Tyrion Lannister was nowhere to be found. Jaime Lannister's fate remained uncertain, and Kevin Lannister's branch of the family had been mostly cut down in the wars. It fell to more distant cousins to parley with the new king. Late one evening, Sansa received a raven from Winterfell. She unrolled the parchment in the flickering light of her chamber, eyes scanning the words. Arya had spent the last few days around the city, but she always had one foot out the door, never fully content to dwell within castle walls. Now, she planned to return to the north. The letter was from Arya, in her own spidery script, informing Sansa that she intended to leave at dawn. There were matters that called her back to the place they had once called home. Sansa felt a pang of longing. Part of her yearned to go as well. She found Arya in the courtyard before the first light of dawn, near the stables where stableboys bustled with saddling her horse. The sky was a deep purple, the stars just beginning to fade. Arya adjusted the straps of her horse's saddle, her breath steaming in the pre-dawn chill. "You're truly leaving?" Sansa asked softly, stepping forward. She wore a heavy cloak over her night robe, having come straight from her chambers. Arya turned, a small tilt of her lips. "You know me, sister. I can't stand to stay still too long. Winterfell needs me. And truth be told, I think you and your king have things handled here." "None." Sansa bit her lip. "But I'll miss you." Arya's expression softened. "I'll come back. I promise. And you'll visit Winterfell when you can. Once the realm settles, you might find time to return home, even if only for a season." Sansa embraced her. Their furs pressed together, and she inhaled the scent of leather, hay, and steel. "Stay safe," Sansa whispered. "And if you encounter trouble on the road." Arya pulled back, a slight smirk on her lips. "I think I can manage. Besides, I have friends scattered in odd places, and a certain reputation might precede me." Sansa recalled the rumors of Arya's feats, how she had toppled House Frey, how she had walked away from death itself. "Yes, no one in their right mind would trouble the Night Wolf," she teased gently. Arya rolled her eyes. "That's not exactly what they call me, but I suppose the sentiment is the same." She mounted her horse, adjusting her hood. "Take care, Sansa, and watch that Targaryen carefully. If he's good to you, so much the better. If not—" She rested a hand on Needle's hilt, her eyes shining with unspoken meaning. Sansa smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He's been good to me, truly." She reached up to squeeze Arya's hand. "Go. While the roads are quiet, may the gods guide you." With a final nod, Arya nudged her horse forward. The stable boy stepped aside, and she rode through the gate, disappearing into the faint light of the city beyond. Sansa stood there, listening to the distant echo of hooves on cobblestone, until the sound faded. She felt both sadness and an odd sense of pride. They had come a long way from the bickering children who once roamed the halls of Winterfell. That same day, as the sun rose over the capital, the routine of governance resumed. Sansa joined Aegon to greet another stream of envoys, some from the Westerlands, others from as far as Dorne. The latter carried tokens of goodwill: small casks of Dornish wine, intricately woven silks. The messenger, a sharp-eyed woman, explained that Dorne was still reeling from the losses inflicted by previous wars, but they wished to open negotiation for a renewed alliance with the Iron Throne, provided their autonomy was respected. Aegon was more than willing to agree to those terms, especially since he had grown up partly under Dornish guardianship while in exile. Sansa saw the relief that flashed in his eyes at Dorne's approach. If they secured peace with Dorne, that closed another front of potential war. At midday, they attended a small lunch with the Westerland lords who had arrived. The group was led by a middle-aged man called Lord Daemon Lannister, a distant cousin to Tywin Lannister. He was tall and raw-boned, with none of the famed golden hair left in his thinning scalp. His voice carried a tension that suggested he felt out of place. "I come to ascertain your intentions for the Westerlands," Lord Daemon said, as they settled around a modest table in a large antechamber. A spread of bread, cold meats and cheese awaited them. "We have heard frightening tales that King's Landing fell in a burst of Targaryen vengeance, that the city is now under martial law, that House Lannister is to be extinguished." Aegon met the man's gaze. "You can see for yourself, Lord Daemon, that the city stands, and the small folk are under our protection. As for House Lannister, I have no desire to exterminate it. My quarrel was with Cersei Lannister, who seized the throne and ruled with cruelty. But the Westerlands remain a vital part of the realm. I invite you to continue your stewardship, provided you accept me as your king." "Menman?" Lord Daemon swallowed, glancing around at his fellow Westerlanders. "And what of Casterly Rock? Does your majesty intend to place a new warden over us?" "Lindra." Aegon nodded to Sansa, who said, "We do intend to appoint a warden of the West, but that position can remain in House Lannister if we find a suitable candidate who will swear loyalty and abide by the laws of the realm. We have no interest in an endless feud. The realm has bled enough." That brought visible relief to Lord Daemon's face. "We are glad to hear it. I can speak for many of the lesser houses, Leffords, Swifts, and so forth. They tire of war. They'll welcome peace, so long as you do not crush us under new burdens." "Hansor." Aegon lifted his cup of watered wine. "A realm at peace benefits all. We'll discuss details, taxes, governance, the seat of power in the Westerlands. But so long as loyalty to the crown is upheld, your autonomy will be respected." Lord Daemon and his retinue toasted to that, though Sansa could sense the flicker of lingering anxiety. The Lannisters had dominated the Westerlands for centuries, but with Tywin and his immediate heirs gone or disgraced, new power structures would form. The region might fracture, if not handled carefully. Aegon and Sansa promised to meet again to hammer out specifics, sending the men away with cordial words. After they left, Aegon turned to Sansa, expression thoughtful. "We'll have to see to Casterly Rock in person eventually." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, though I suspect the very sight of a Targaryen banner might rattle them. We need to ensure a smooth transition, possibly by letting them elect a local steward who pledges fealty and stands as warden. Lord Daemon might serve, but we'll see if there's a better candidate." "Nah." Aegon sighed. "Perhaps after the city is more stable, we can travel west for a royal progress. Show them we come in peace and not as conquerors." She smiled softly. "You sound like a king who prefers alliances to conquest." "That's precisely the king I'd like to be," he murmured, reaching for her hand. In the subsequent days, the city took on a new rhythm. Markets reopened. Foreign traders arrived by ship, and the Gold Cloaks instituted stricter but more even-handed patrols. Reports came from Ser Brienne that the brigands on the Rosby Road had been defeated, their leaders taken captive. She wrote of minimal casualties among the crown's forces. Sansa read the letter with satisfaction. Another pocket of lawlessness quelled. Amid these practical matters, the swirl of courtly life returned. Courtiers from all corners of the Seven Kingdoms drifted to King's Landing, seeking favor or position in the new royal court. Sansa had not forgotten how dangerous such a court could be, nor how lethal the intrigues. She took care to keep her retinue small, relying on individuals whose loyalty she had tested, like Brienne, or the new ladies-in-waiting she'd vetted personally, or certain Northmen who had followed her from Winterfell. She also kept a careful watch on any new arrivals, who seemed particularly charming or ambitious, remembering Petyr Baelish's talent for worming his way into hearts and halls. She would not allow a new Littlefinger to sow seeds of treachery. She had learned too well the price of trust misplaced. One afternoon, as the autumn sun began its gentle fade over the city walls, Sansa and Aegon took a quiet walk on the battlements, reviewing the fortifications. The ramparts still bore scars from dragonfire in the previous wars, but mason crews worked diligently to restore the crumbled portions. She could smell mortar and fresh stone dust on the wind. Aegon leaned on the parapet, surveying the busy harbor. "I spoke to the master of ships today. He's begun refitting the royal fleet in earnest, though it'll be a year or more before we have a navy that can rival the Ironborn. Gendry in the Stormlands is coordinating coastal defenses. It's a start." Sansa folded her arms, the breeze ruffling her hair. "We should still send emissaries to the Iron Islands. If there are those among the Ironborn who oppose Euron, they might be open to an alliance." He turned slightly, his eyes tracing her profile. "So many letters to send, alliances to forge. I sometimes wonder if I spend more time writing words than acting." She gave him a faint, wry grin. "Words are actions too when you're king. A single letter can avert a war, or spark one. Let's hope we choose wisely." Below them, a flock of gulls rose in a white flurry, squawking across the sky. Sansa watched them wheel over the rooftops, her thoughts drifting. "I used to dream of flying away from this city," she said softly, remembering her younger self caged in the Red Keep. "I'd look at the birds and envy their freedom." Aegon's hand found hers on the stone ledge. "I'm sorry this place was such a prison for you. I wish—" She gave his fingers a gentle squeeze. "No regrets. I survived. I learned. And now I'm here as queen, not a captive. The city and I have both changed." He nodded, his expression thoughtful, then glanced at the southwestern horizon. "When the realm finds more stability, we'll travel, Sansa. We'll go to Winterfell, to the Eyrie, maybe even across the sea for a short time, if only to show the realm that we are not trapped in these walls. A king and queen who stay always in one place risk losing touch with the people." She felt a surge of gratitude for the promise, uncertain though it was in times of reconstruction. "I'd like that. It would be freeing." She turned from the battlements, and he followed, descending the steps into the courtyard. In the days that followed, they set a date for a royal procession through the nearby Crownlands villages. It would be a modest journey, meant to reassure people that the new reign cared for their well-being. They would visit Rosby, Stokeworth, and a handful of other holds, hopefully leaving behind a sense of hope and stability. Preparations occupied much of the next week. Horses were groomed, wagons loaded, and a portion of the royal guard ready to travel. A small group of courtiers insisted on coming, eager for the chance to display themselves in the queen's presence. Sansa allowed some of them, but insisted the retinue remain lean. Too large a party would burden the roads and overshadow the villages. Aegon, for his part, was even less inclined toward pomp, though he recognized the necessity of some ceremonial presence. Finally, the morning arrived. King's Landing woke to the clang of hooves and the murmur of watchers crowding the streets. The king and queen consort emerged from the Red Keep astride their horses, Aegon on a black courser, Sansa on a dappled gray mare. Guards in Targaryen stark livery flanked them. Snow was nowhere to be seen here, but Sansa felt a twinge of nostalgia for her northern homeland at the sight of her direwolf banner beside the three-headed dragon. The crowd parted with a hushed reverence, a few cheers, and more than a few curious stares. They wove through the city, out the gates, and onto the main road. The autumn sunlight was gentle on their faces. Sansa breathed in the open air, sensing a spark of optimism. Beside her, Aegon looked more at ease than he had in weeks. Perhaps the palace walls weighed on him as well. Their first stop was Rosby. Sir Brienne's expedition against the brigands had cleared the way, so they found the small castle overshadowed by scaffolding, repairs for damage caused by skirmishes. The local lord, barely more than a boy, bowed awkwardly before them, his face pale with nerves. Sansa dismounted, feeling the eyes of the villagers upon her. Many had never seen a queen, let alone a queen with northern coloring. She smiled, extending a hand to the young lord. "We've come to see how we might help with your rebuilding." He swallowed, managed a nod, and led them on a tour of the battered courtyard. Villagers had gathered timbers, the men hammering boards, women carrying baskets of nails. Aegon paused to speak with a group of them, offering encouragement. Sansa noted how the Queen's Guard maintained a protective ring, but allowed the king and queen to interact freely. This was exactly what she wanted. No more distance, no more fear. In the great hall of Rosby Castle, they sat for a modest meal of stewed parsnips, salted pork, and fresh bread. The hall had seen better days. Some tapestries were torn, the dais was marred, but there was a warmth in the hospitality that Sansa appreciated. She and Aegon heard out the locals' grievances. Shortage of skilled carpenters, fear of stray bandits in the woods, anxiety about trade routes. Aegon pledged that the crown would pay for a small group of carpenters to come from King's Landing. Sansa encouraged them to form a local militia, offering them a small stipend. The villagers seemed surprised that the king and queen would bother with such details, but Sansa could sense their gratitude. They continued along the road, stopping at small hamlets where the people greeted them shyly. Children ran up with wide eyes. Sansa smiled, patting their heads, while Aegon laughed quietly at their antics. In these simple gestures, they each found a reminder of why they ruled: to protect these innocents from the horrors they had once endured. The progress lasted a fortnight, winding through the lesser-known paths and villages of the Crownlands. Each place presented its own struggles: a failing well, a crumbling bridge, a small sept in need of repairs. Sansa and Aegon listened, promised assistance where possible, and encouraged local resourcefulness when feasible. They had no illusions that every promise could be fulfilled immediately, but even small gestures, like distributing some leftover grain or setting up a meeting with traveling masons, went a long way toward showing the crown cared. They spent nights in the halls of minor lords, or in tents if lodging was limited. The weather grew cooler as autumn advanced, yet the crisp air felt invigorating. Sansa slept more soundly than she had in the Red Keep, often stirring in the pre-dawn to watch the mist rise over fields and copses of trees. Aegon joined her sometimes, and they would stand quietly, exchanging soft words. On one such morning, near a place called Upland's Glen, Sansa walked just beyond the camp to a gentle hillock, topped by an oak. She breathed in the scent of dew-laced grass. Her cloak shielded her from the chill, and she turned to see Aegon approaching, hair rumpled from sleep. He joined her, following her gaze over the rolling fields, where farmers had begun their day. "You seem at peace out here," he said softly. She nodded. "I am. It reminds me a bit of the land south of Winterfell, though warmer. There's a life and a rhythm to the countryside that the city's walls can't replicate. Here people rise with the dawn and sleep with the dusk, living off what they can grow or hunt. It feels real somehow." He studied her face. "When we return to King's Landing, it will be back to councils, letters, and endless politics." She let out a quiet sigh. "Yes, but at least we'll know we've seen the people, touched their struggles. It'll keep us grounded." A faint curve of her lips. "And maybe, occasionally we can slip away for short visits, like a breath of fresh air." He slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her gently to him. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body against the crisp morning. "We'll do that," he murmured. "I promise you. We won't lose ourselves in that red fortress." They lingered for a while watching the sunrise, before returning to break camp. The retinue set out on the final leg of their journey, turning back toward King's Landing. Along the way, a messenger found them with news that Lord John Royce from the Vale was en route to the capital. He carried updates about the Eyrie, and possibly some proposals about forming deeper ties between the Vale and the Crown. Sansa guessed that some of the Vale lords still harbored reservations about Targaryen rule. Jon Royce was honorable, but proud, a man of old ways and northern adjacent loyalties. She wasn't certain how he would respond to the sight of a Targaryen king on the Iron Throne, even if that Targaryen was allied with a Stark. They reached the city by late afternoon, on a cool, breezy day. The gates opened to admit them, and the people of King's Landing lined the streets to catch a glimpse of their returning king and queen. This time, the cheers were louder, the sense of acceptance stronger. Sansa felt a glow of satisfaction at seeing fewer ragged beggars and more hopeful faces. Progress was slow, but it was there. Inside the Red Keep, the courtiers who had not joined the progress awaited them. A flurry of bows and welcomes greeted them. Sansa exchanged a few polite words, then let the servants help her change out of her travel-stained cloak. She emerged, refreshed, in a simpler gown. Aegon also bathed and changed swiftly. They reconvened in a lesser hall to meet Lord Jon Royce, who had arrived that morning, as rumored. Lord Royce was a commanding figure, broad of shoulder, with iron-gray hair and a runic breastplate. He saluted Aegon and inclined his head respectfully to Sansa, though his gaze carried an undercurrent of scrutiny. "Your Graces," he said, voice deep as a canyon. "The Vale stands ready to parley." Sansa stepped forward with a courteous nod. "Lord Jon, you are most welcome. The Vale has always been dear to me, as you know. Please, speak freely." Royce looked from her to Aegon, then back again. "We have done as we said. The roads from the Vale remain open, and trade has improved. However, we are concerned about any further military demands. The Vale has bled in these wars, though perhaps not as much as the Riverlands or the North. We want assurances that our men will not be dragged into new conflicts unless absolutely necessary." "No." Aegon, standing at Sansa's side, inclined his head. "I have no wish to conscript the Vale's forces, Lord Royce. My aim is to strengthen the realm through unity, not subjugation. If a threat arises that imperils the entire kingdom, I would hope the Vale stands with the crown. But I will not demand your men for personal conquest." Royce considered him with a grave expression. "And what of the Targaryen claim? Some in the Vale remember the old days when dragons forced the Seven Kingdoms to bend the knee. Times have changed, but memories linger." Aegon's posture stayed calm. "I have no dragons, and I do not rule through fear. I was born with the name Targaryen, but I claim no right to tyranny. I seek the people's support through just governance, alliances, and the free exchange of goods. If the Vale wishes to remain in harmony with the crown, I welcome it. If you have doubts, voice them." Royce grunted, impressed or at least placated. He turned to Sansa. "You vouch for him?" She lifted her chin. "I do. I've seen his actions firsthand. He is not his ancestors, nor is he blinded by the madness of the Mad King. He governs with reason, listens to counsel, and he has the North's respect. He can earn yours as well." Royce's face softened. "I trust your judgment, Lady Sansa. We will continue to support the crown, so long as it respects the Vale's rights. I come bearing small tokens of support, grain from our mountain farms, and a regiment of knights who volunteered to help secure the roads in the Crown lands." A faint smile curved Aegon's lips. "We thank you. The city needs every bushel of grain we can muster, and the roads must remain safe for trade. Your knights will be put to good use." They went on to discuss more details: trade tariffs, troop placements, the Vale's future role in the Royal Council. Royce carried himself with a frankness that Sansa found refreshing. He did not mince words, but neither was he insulting. By the end of the meeting, it was clear the Vale would remain an ally, albeit a cautious one. Sansa felt a weight lift. One more piece of the puzzle fell into place. At dinner that evening, a smaller gathering convened in the Great Hall to welcome Lord Royce and his entourage. Sansa sat at the high table, mind whirling with the day's events. Around them, the hall buzzed with conversation, minstrels playing a subdued tune. Aegon joined the talk with an ease that belied his weariness, and Sansa did the same. They had learned the art of smiling through exhaustion long ago. Toward the end of the meal, a raven arrived for Aegon, bearing the seal of Dorne. He scanned the letter, a flicker of excitement crossing his face. Sansa leaned toward him, arching a brow. "Good news?" she asked quietly. He folded the parchment, nodding. "Yes. Dorne wishes to formalize an alliance. They invite us to send a royal delegation to Sunspear. They've been rebuilding after the war, and they want to ensure we acknowledge their sovereignty in local matters. In return, they promise to open trade routes through the Boneway and Prince's Pass. This is significant." She felt a surge of relief. That would grant us more leverage in the southern seas as well, if Dorne cooperates. It's the final piece for a unified realm. Aegon's eyes gleamed with a hint of mirth. "They've requested we attend in person, if possible. Dorne can be insistent about personal diplomacy, and I haven't seen Sunspear since I was a child, traveling in secret. This time, we'd arrive openly as king and queen." Sansa considered. "The journey is long, but if it cements peace, it might be worth it. We can appoint a regent for the city in our absence, someone we trust to keep the peace. Perhaps we can go after the harvest festivals, once we're sure King's Landing is stable." Aegon agreed, setting the letter aside for later discussion. Lord Royce, noticing their private exchange, gave a knowing look but asked no questions. The conversation shifted to more mundane topics: the best ways to store grain, the upcoming winter festivals, and gossip about the court. Sansa participated politely, but felt her mind racing ahead, picturing a potential trip to Dorne. The idea both excited and worried her. Leaving King's Landing for a month or more carried risks. Yet forging an alliance with Dorne could be the final, crucial link to secure the realm. After dinner, they retired to a smaller chamber, where the cool night air wafted through an open window. Aegon sat in a cushioned chair, massaging his temples. Sansa joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Headache?" He nodded, offering a wry smile. "Too many lords, too many letters. Not enough quiet." She fetched a small bottle of lavender-scented oil from a nearby shelf, something the apothecaries had recommended for tension. Pouring a bit into her palm, she gently massaged his temples. He closed his eyes, exhaling in relief. "That's good," he murmured. She continued in quiet concentration, letting the hush of the room settle around them. The flicker of torchlight cast dancing shadows on the walls. Finally, he opened his eyes, capturing her wrist lightly. "Thank you." She smiled down at him. "We're in this together." His gaze lingered on her. "Yes, we are." He rose, guiding her hand to his chest. "If not for you, I doubt I'd have come this far without crumbling under the weight. You give me balance, Sansa." She felt her heart flutter, a surge of fondness coursing through her veins. "You give me hope," she whispered. "Hope that I can do more than just survive, that I can help shape a realm where little girls aren't forced into marriages, to brutes or used as pawns in power games." He bent his head, resting his forehead against hers. "We'll build that realm day by day." They stood like that for a while, warm in each other's presence. Outside the windows, the city sprawled, lit by torches and lanterns. The distant hum of life drifted through the night air. Sansa closed her eyes, imagining that one day, the entire realm might find a measure of peace. People would travel safely, feed their families, and not live in terror of lords' whims or crown-fueled wars. The scars left by past rulers might fade, replaced by the steady, patient progress of a kingdom reunited. Eventually, they broke apart, preparing for rest. Sansa extinguished the lamps, letting the moonlight fill the room with silver shadows. Aegon gently helped her undo the fastenings of her gown, and she did the same for him, both moving in a quiet, familiar rhythm. In the hush of the night, they found a solace that came not from grand declarations, but from the simple act of being together, supporting each other through every burden. In the days that followed, the notion of traveling to Dorne became more concrete. Preparations began in earnest, though Aegon and Sansa agreed that the city must be truly stable before they could depart. The crowning of new regional wardens and finalizing key appointments in the royal council became urgent. Sansa recommended that Sir Brienne be named the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, if she would accept. Aegon approved, impressed by Brienne's valor and unshakable sense of duty. When asked, Brienne humbly agreed, though she seemed taken aback by the honor. Thus, amid court ceremonies, Brienne of Tarth knelt before the Iron Throne, her armor polished to a mirror sheen, and swore her oath to protect the king and queen with her life. Aegon placed a new white cloak over her shoulders, embroidered with the three-headed dragon entwined with a direwolf. Sansa watched, heart swelling. "Rise, Sir Brienne, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard," Aegon proclaimed, and the hall erupted in applause. A strong step forward for a new era, one that elevated loyalty and honor above birth or tradition. Meanwhile, a small crisis arose with the city's finances. The Master of Coin uncovered hidden debts left over from Cersei's rule, as well as interest owed to the Iron Bank. Sansa and Aegon had to orchestrate a plan to repay those debts over time, without squeezing the people too hard. They spent late nights poring over ledgers, comparing possible taxes on luxury goods, seaports, and trade caravans. It was tedious and frustrating, but if the crown fell into insolvency, all their efforts at peace would be threatened. During one such late session, the door to the Solar burst open, and Sir Brienne entered, helmet in hand, face drawn. "My apologies, Your Graces. There's urgent news. Euron Greyjoy's ships have been sighted near Crackclaw Point. They raided a small fishing village. Casualties are reported." Aegon shot to his feet, face darkening. "Have our scouts confirmed? How many ships?" Brienne bowed her head in regret. "Unclear. At least half a dozen. They struck quickly, then fled. The villagers recognized Euron's banner. They're requesting help, fearing he might return." "Daddy." Sansa felt a surge of alarm. "Crackclaw Point is too close to King's Landing. We can't allow him to slip so near." Aegon flexed his hands, the tension radiating through him. "We'll dispatch a squadron of our own ships immediately. Alert the garrison at Dragonstone to keep watch. I want a message sent to Gendry in the Stormlands, too. If Euron tries to round the coast, we must be ready." Brienne nodded. "I'll see to it at once. Shall I organize riders to warn nearby villages?" "Yes," Sansa said. "And we should consider stationing more troops along the shore. If Euron's testing our defenses, he might be planning a larger strike." Once Brienne left, Sansa and Aegon exchanged grim looks. The re-emergence of the Ironborn threat reminded them how tenuous peace still was. "We'll handle this," Aegon said softly. "But it means Dorne might have to wait." Sansa pressed her lips together, nodding. "Duty first. If Euron remains a threat, we can't leave the capital unguarded." So the plans for the royal visit to Dorne were placed on hold. Instead, Aegon threw himself into fortifying the coasts and coordinating a response with Gendry Baratheon. Over the coming weeks, scattered reports of Ironborn raids trickled in. A few fishing villages looted, some merchant ships attacked. Euron seemed to strike at random, never lingering long enough for the crown's fleet to catch him. The frustration mounted. Sansa heard courtiers whispering about the damned kraken haunting their seas. Some spread rumors that Euron commanded dark sorceries. She dismissed the rumors as nonsense, but she knew Euron's cunning should never be underestimated. The tension in the city grew. Under the surface, people feared a repeat of the War of the Five Kings, chaos and bloodshed. Sansa endeavored to reassure them with public declarations and demonstrations of readiness. Aegon met with the Master of Ships daily, pressing for faster ship construction and repairs. Letters flew to the north, the Vale, the Riverlands, urging caution near the coasts. Allies responded with sympathy and pledged to help if Euron dared push inland, but few had the ships needed to chase him at sea. As weeks turned to months, the raids continued sporadically. Euron never launched a full-scale invasion, but his presence kept everyone on edge. Sansa wondered if his aim was simply to sow fear and disruption, perhaps waiting for the realm to weaken itself with overextension. Yet, the kingdom stood firm. The measures they took, improving coastal defenses, reorganizing the navy, gradually made the waters less friendly to pirates. The cost in coin and manpower was substantial, but it had to be done. One evening, Sansa found herself alone in the gardens, the air tinged with the cool snap of approaching winter. She wore a heavy cloak, her breath curling in the moonlight. She traced her fingers along the edge of a thorny rosebush, remembering the first day she came here after the coronation. The roses were in better shape now, freed from choking weeds, but the thorns remained sharp. She sensed a presence behind her and turned to see Aegon approaching, similarly cloaked. His expression was pensive. "It's late," he said softly. "You should be resting." "I could say the same to you," she replied, managing a small smile. "Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head, stepping beside her. "My mind churns with strategy. How do we finally corner Euron? Should we risk a larger naval engagement? What if he's baiting us into a trap? And if he flees back to the Iron Islands, do we pursue him at the risk of leaving the city exposed? On and on it goes." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "We do what we can, step by step. We've prevented him from causing real devastation so far. He's nibbling at the edges, but the realm holds. The people see that we're standing firm." He exhaled. "I just don't want to fail them. So many rely on us now." "But son." "You won't fail them," she said. "We won't fail them. Even if Euron can't be crushed overnight, he's not toppling us. You're not alone in this, remember that." He looked at her, eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You're right," he murmured. "I just wish this shadow could be lifted, so we could focus on healing the realm completely. Dorne, the Westerlands, the North, they all need attention, and we can't give it fully while a threat lurks at sea." She nodded, feeling the chill wind whisper through the leaves. A realm's never entirely without threats. Even if Euron vanished tomorrow, some other problem might arise. That's the nature of governance. We manage each crisis, keep the realm stable, and carry on. "Next tell." His lips curved in a rueful smile. "I married a realist." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm lucky for it." They stood there for a while, the hush of the garden cradling them. The moon passed behind a cloud, casting them into softer darkness. Sansa closed her eyes, leaning into him. She felt his warmth, felt the steady beat of his heart. The realm might be large and perilous, fraught with ghosts of old wars, but in that moment, they existed solely in the space of each other's arms. Eventually, they returned indoors, where a single torch lit the corridor leading to their chambers. Down the hallway, a tapestry depicting the Targaryen sigil rippled in a draft. Sansa paused to look at it. 3 heads of the dragon ringed in black and red. She thought of how that banner now stood alongside the direwolf. She thought of the old songs she once cherished, how they never told the full story of kingship or queenship, how they left out the ceaseless labor, the constant fear, the heartbreak of decisions that cost lives. And yet, for all she had seen and done, she could not regret the path that brought her here. She sensed Aegon watching her, and she turned. He offered a faint, understanding smile. Silently, they continued on, passing into their chamber, leaving the tapestry behind. Inside, the bed was made up with fresh linens, the fire crackling softly. They undressed in companionable quiet, exhausted by the day's demands. As she crawled under the blankets, she caught his hand. "Sleep," she whispered. He bent to kiss her forehead. "Sleep," he echoed. They settled down, the concerns of the realm a drumbeat in the back of their minds, but for a few hours at least, they could rest in the knowledge that they faced those concerns together. Time passed, measured in incremental victories and lingering anxieties. The first snows fell in the north, heralding another winter, though the southern lands felt only a mild coolness in the air. Letters from Winterfell arrived sporadically, with updates on Arya's quiet stewardship. She had no interest in calling herself Lady of Winterfell, leaving that title for Sansa, but she made sure the holdfast was well defended. Letters from Edmure Tully in the Riverlands described a decent harvest, with crows picking the last gleanings from the fields. The Vale, under Royce's watchful eye, thrived in relative peace. Even the Westerland seemed to settle with no immediate rebellion. Only the Iron Islands kept the realm from fully breathing easy. Still, no large fleet sightings of Euron came. Rumor had it he lurked near some hidden cove, or that he'd struck a deal with pirates in the Stepstones. Speculation ran wild. Meanwhile, the slow, steady work of reconstruction in King's Landing continued. Streets were repaired, a new set of city ordinances enacted, and the Faith of the Seven resumed normal functions under a more moderate High Septon. Sansa occasionally walked among the people in disguise, flanked by Brienne or another trusted guard. She found the city more hopeful, if still wary. One brisk morning, near the end of autumn, a sudden commotion stirred the Red Keep. A raven from the north arrived, carrying stark news. A minor band of wildlings had been found wandering south of the wall. They were half-starved, claiming that something stirred in the lands of always winter. Strange sightings, rumors of restless dead. The memory of the White Walkers and the long night had barely begun to fade. This news, however, was vague, and no clear threat was described. Still, it stoked fear in those who heard it. Sansa and Aegon discussed the matter in private. "We can't ignore any talk of the dead," Sansa said, voice tight. "But the realm can't endure another war like that, especially not now. Let's send more men to the wall to investigate, and ensure the Night's Watch is reinforced. If it's a false alarm, so much the better. If not, the North must be prepared." Aegon agreed. "We'll stand with the North, but let's confirm facts before spreading alarm. The last thing we need is panic while we're still stabilizing everything else." A raven was dispatched to Winterfell, instructing them to send rangers beyond the wall to verify the wildlings' claims. In the meantime, Sansa prayed to the old gods that the threat was nothing more than a rumor born of hardship. The realm was still too fragile to face another existential horror. Through it all, Sansa and Aegon found moments of closeness that transcended the burden of crowns. There were quiet dinners, stolen walks in the gardens, and the hush of nights spent whispering of the future. Sansa felt her love for him deepen, not in a girlish idealistic way, but with a mature bond forged through shared trials. She had once dreamed of a gallant prince who would make her swoon with ballads and sweet words. The reality of their marriage was far more complex and far more rewarding. Where once she had been a timid pawn, she now found herself an equal partner, shaping the fate of a kingdom. One evening, after a minor banquet celebrating the city's progress, Sansa lingered by the open window of their chamber. Outside, a crisp wind blew, carrying the distant sound of music from the streets. Someone celebrating a birth or a name day, perhaps. She rested her hands on the sill, letting the wind play with her hair. Aegon came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, closing her eyes. They stood like that for a time, listening to the muffled revelry below. Then, in a low voice near her ear, Aegon said, "I wonder if we'll have children one day to carry on this peace we're building." Her heart gave a tiny leap. They had not spoken much of it, both mindful that a royal heir was a weighty matter, fraught with expectations. "Do you want that?" she asked, turning her head to glance at him. He considered for a moment. "I think so. Not because the realm demands it or because we need an heir, but because I'd like a family, a new generation that doesn't grow up in the shadow of war and fear." Her throat felt tight. "I do too," she said softly. "Though the idea frightens me sometimes. This world has been so cruel in the past." He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "We'll make it kinder. We'll try at least." She placed a hand atop his, resting on her abdomen. "Perhaps, when the time is right, the gods will grant us a child. And we'll do all we can to ensure that child knows a better realm than we did." He nodded, silent but warm against her back. The night air felt almost electric, charged with possibilities. Down in the streets, the music and laughter rose briefly, a sweet testament that life went on, even after so many tragedies. Thus the days continued. The dawns came, the nights fell, and each hour found them weaving the tapestry of a new era. Sometimes it frayed. Rumors of Euron Greyjoy, uncertainties in the Iron Islands, flickers of potential unrest among certain lords. But always they mended it, stitch by careful stitch, forging alliances and tending to the everyday needs of a realm that had seen too much bloodshed. Winter loomed, at least for the north. Snow would blanket Winterfell soon, while King's Landing would grow cold and damp. Sansa thought often of her ancestral home. She imagined the weirwood in the godswood, branches laden with ice. She remembered how, as a child, she had hated the long, dark nights, never suspecting how those nights might shape her into someone strong enough to stand at the center of power in Westeros. Now, she walked the Red Keep's corridors with the assured bearing of a woman who had survived the worst and refused to be bowed by it. Each step forward in governance was a triumph, however small. The roads became safer. Trade flowed more freely. The people grew accustomed to seeing the silver-haired king, a Targaryen who did not bring dragons to burn them, and the red-haired queen, a Stark whose quiet grace had once charmed them unwittingly, but now ruled them knowingly. The bards began composing new songs about the union of ice and fire, spinning tales of romance and destiny. Sansa listened to them with a wry half-smile, aware of how many truths were glossed over. But she let the people have their stories. Hope was woven into every lyric. On one particular morning, as the light broke in a pale wash over the horizon, Sansa woke with a sense of calm. She dressed in a simple gown of gray wool, feeling an odd flutter in her stomach. Perhaps it was the dream she'd had of walking in the godswood at Winterfell, where the heart tree whispered inaudible words. She went to the solar, expecting to find Aegon, but instead found Maester Wolkan from Winterfell, newly arrived, warming himself by the fire. He bowed low. "Your Grace, I bring tidings from the north. Arya Stark has returned from a journey beyond the wall, with the Night's Watch Rangers. They report that the undead rumors are unfounded. There was a cluster of wights once trapped in ice, but the spring thaw revealed and quickly destroyed them. The threat appears minor." Relief flooded Sansa's chest. "And Arya? She's safe?" Wolkan smiled. "Yes, quite safe. She's traveling back to Winterfell now." "And Sansa clasped her hands together, exhaling tension she hadn't realized she held. "The gods be praised." She glanced around, looking for Aegon. "Have you shared this with the king?" "I came here first, at your sister's request. She specifically asked me to assure you there was no cause for alarm." He paused. "I will inform His Majesty at once." She smiled. "Thank you, Maester Wolkan. Please take refreshment. You must be weary from the road." Once he left, she sat by the fire, letting the relief wash over her. The realm did not need another great war. They had enough to contend with. This news was a blessing, a reminder that not all shadows looming in the north portended doom. Not an hour later, Aegon entered the solar, brow creased with curiosity. He found her standing by the window, gazing out at the brightening day. "I heard the news from Wolkan," he said. "It seems we can rest easy about the rumors beyond the wall." She turned to him, warmth in her eyes. "Yes, it appears so." He stepped closer, taking her hands. "One less worry. Now, perhaps we can revisit the idea of traveling to Dorne. The lords there grow impatient, but they understand that a realm newly at peace has many priorities. Yet each passing day might risk offending them. And if we show we stand by our word, we might gain a powerful ally." "Niveton." Sansa nodded. "Yes, let's do it. Euron's raids have subsided, so perhaps he's realized he can't challenge us directly. We have a decent naval defense now. The city is stronger. Let's plan the journey before winter closes the passes in the Stormlands and makes travel even more difficult." He smiled, a genuine, almost boyish grin. "Then we'll set the wheels in motion. A royal progress to Sunspear. It feels surreal, considering I spent my childhood crossing the sea in secret. But now, we'll go openly as king and queen." "Menind." She squeezed his hand, sharing in the anticipation. "Let them see the realm truly united. From the north to Dorne, from the Vale to the Stormlands, from the Reach to the Westerlands. Well, mend these shards of war." His eyes shone with determination. "We will, step by step, as we've always done." In the days that followed, plans for the royal journey took shape. Letters flew to Dorne, confirming dates and routes. The retinue was chosen, smaller than some might expect for a royal couple, but more agile. Ser Brienne would remain in King's Landing as Lord Commander, securing the capital, while a select few knights would accompany the king and queen. Sansa and Aegon wanted to present themselves not as conquerors but as friends coming in good faith. Preparations stirred excitement in the Red Keep. Servants packed provisions, seamstresses readied lightweight garments suitable for the Dornish heat, and horses were chosen for the long ride. Some suggested traveling by sea around Dorne's coast, but Aegon preferred the land route, ensuring they could stop in the Stormlands and pay courtesy to Gendry Baratheon, further cementing alliances. At last, the departure day arrived. Dawn broke pink and orange over King's Landing. Sansa and Aegon mounted their horses at the Red Keep's gates, banners fluttering overhead. The small crowd that gathered cheered and waved. Lord Commander Brienne saluted them, the white cloak on her shoulders shining in the morning light. Sansa felt a thrill of anticipation, the same flutter she used to feel as a girl before setting off on a grand adventure. Except now she was no naive girl, and this was no idle escapade. She was the queen consort of the Seven Kingdoms, riding forth to weave another vital thread in the tapestry of peace. They passed through the city streets, receiving blessings and farewells from the small folk. Soon they emerged onto the open road, the retinue trailing behind like a bright serpent. King's Landing receded into the distance, its walls a reminder of the duties they left behind. Yet each duty was entrusted to capable hands. As they rode south, the air grew warmer. The small talk among the knights turned to musings about Dornish customs and rumored feasts. Sansa recalled her mother's tales of Dorne, the bright sun, the spiced wines, the fiercely independent people. She glanced at Aegon, who looked both eager and resolute. In his eyes she saw a reflection of her own conviction. They were not traveling as conquerors, but as builders of a new age. The first leg brought them to Storm's End, perched on the edge of the sea. Gendry Baratheon greeted them in the courtyard with a broad smile, flanked by knights in stag-emblazoned tabards. He clasped Aegon's arm in a warrior's greeting, then bowed politely to Sansa, though his grin lingered. Sansa saw the flicker of memory. Gendry had once traveled with Arya, forging an unlikely friendship. Now he was lord of this ancient stronghold. He looked comfortable in the role, his black hair whipped by the coastal wind. Storm's End's massive walls bore the brunt of crashing waves and howling gales, yet inside there was a coziness Sansa appreciated. They spent 2 nights there, sharing feasts of fish stew and roast venison, listening to the swirl of Stormlander music. Gendry showed them the repairs he had overseen. Shattered walls from past sieges now fortified, a bustling harbor restored. He spoke of attempts to keep Euron's raiders at bay, aided by the Stormlander fleet. Sansa noted how well Gendry commanded the loyalty of his men, a testament to his blunt honesty and strength. On the second evening, as they walked the battlements overlooking a stormy sea, Gendry said quietly to Aegon, "I never expected to be Lord of Storm's End. I was a bastard, forging armor in a smithy. But times changed. Wars ended some houses, raised others. I'm grateful for your trust in me." Aegon clapped his shoulder. "You earned it. Blood aside, whether Baratheon, Targaryen, or any other name, we need leaders who care for their people. You do." Sansa added, "The Stormlands seem to prosper under you, Gendry. I'm sure my sister would be proud if she saw all this." A shadow of a fond smile crossed Gendry's face. "I hope so." He cleared his throat. "The next time Arya visits the Stormlands, maybe I can convince her to stay longer than a day. She's always moving." "No me entiendes." Sansa returned a gentle smile. "That's Arya, but I suspect she appreciates having a friend here, should she ever slow her wanderings." They departed Storm's End under gray skies, heading inland toward the pass that would lead them into Dornish territory. The terrain shifted gradually, the climate warming, the air carrying a hint of desert dryness. They passed through a series of forts and watchtowers that once marked the border between the Stormlands and Dorne. Now, with alliances being renewed, the tension in these places was reduced, though the watchmen still observed them warily. As they rode deeper, the landscape changed dramatically. Red mountains rose in the distance, dotted with hardy scrub and cacti. The sun beat down, making the northern-bred horses sweat. Sansa felt perspiration on her brow beneath her light cloak, but she marveled at the stark beauty of Dorne, The red sands, the bright sky, the dryness that made each sip of water precious. After days of travel, they caught sight of Sunspear, its slender towers and domed roofs reflected in the shimmering heat. Approaching the seat of House Martell, they passed vineyards and olive groves, winding roads lined with cypress trees. Dornish banners fluttered, depicting a sun pierced by a spear. When they finally reached the gates of Sunspear, a welcoming party awaited them. Prince Corin of House Martell, a tall man with olive skin and dark hair plated with gold beads, along with several Dornish nobles. Prince Corin stepped forward, inclining his head to Aegon. "Your Majesty, King Aegon Targaryen, we welcome you to Sunspear. And you, Queen Sansa of House Stark, Dorne is honored by your presence." Sansa dismounted, smoothing her cloak. She and Aegon both bowed in respect. "Thank you, Prince Corin. We come in friendship and hope to cement a lasting alliance." Corin's dark eyes sparkled. "Then you shall have every hospitality Sunspear can offer. My hall is yours to command. Let us feast tonight, and tomorrow we'll speak of treaties." Dornish guards led them into the city's winding streets. The architecture unlike anything Sansa had seen in the north. Bright tiles, latticed windows, tall spires that caught the sun's glare. The people wore loose robes or flowing dresses, greeting the newcomers with both curiosity and measured warmth. The retinue was shown to comfortable quarters, complete with breezy balconies overlooking the sea. The vibrant palette of the surroundings, deep oranges, reds, and yellows, contrasted sharply with the austere colors of the north and the regal black and red of the Targaryen court. But the difference was exciting rather than jarring. That night, in the grand hall of Sunspear, tables groaned with dishes spiced and savory. Grilled peppers, flatbreads drizzled with oil, spiced lamb skewers, sweet wine cooled in earthen jugs. Musicians played lutes and drums, weaving exotic melodies that echoed among the pillars. Sansa felt her senses overwhelmed by the richness of it all. Prince Corin presided at the high table, exchanging pleasantries with Aegon and Sansa, while introducing them to various Dornish lords and ladies. Some were older, with sun-worn faces that suggested they remembered the last war with Targaryens. Others were younger, curious to see if these new rulers truly heralded a different era. Sansa met them with polite grace, mindful that Dorne had never fully bent the knee in the days of Aegon the Conqueror. Their independence ran deep, and respect was paramount. Conversations that night touched lightly on politics, focusing more on hospitality and reassurance. The formal negotiations, Corin insisted, would begin on the morrow. For now, they feasted as potential allies. Dancers performed in swirling silks, turning the hall into a riot of color. Sansa found herself clapping along with the crowd, fascinated by the fluid motions and the haunting rhythms of Dornish music. She glanced at Aegon, who smiled back, equally enthralled. Later, she and Aegon walked through Sunspear's moonlit gardens, guided by a Dornish retainer who pointed out rare desert flowers and citrus trees. Warm breezes carried the scent of lemons and night-blooming jasmine. "This place feels like another world," Sansa murmured, brushing her fingertips over a delicate flower. Aegon nodded, exhaling softly. "Different from King's Landing, different from the north, different from anywhere we've been. But that's what makes Westeros so remarkable. So many lands, each unique." They came upon a small reflecting pool, where lanterns cast shimmering patterns on the water. The retainer discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. Sansa removed her sandals, dipping her toes in the cool water. Aegon sat beside her, swirling his hand in the pool. Reflections of the moon danced across their faces. "If all goes well," he said quietly, "we'll secure Dorne's open trade and mutual defense. That will bind the entire realm in peace, at least for a time. We might achieve what my father never could, a truly united Westeros, by consent rather than conquest." "Ben," she leaned over, kissing his temple. "You've worked for this, we both have. Our marriage was the first step, bridging the North and the Targaryens. Now we bridge Dorne, the Vale, the Reach, all the others. It might not be perfect, but it's a start." He turned, meeting her gaze. In the lantern light, his eyes shone with quiet determination, And something softer, too. A start we make together, he murmured, pulling her close. She settled against his shoulder, the desert wind brushing their hair. In that moment, Sansa allowed herself a rare indulgence. A sense of triumph. Not the gloating triumph of power, but the gentle triumph of having survived and shaped her own fate. A girl once caged in King's Landing, sold into nightmares, was now forging alliances that might preserve the peace of an entire continent. She had found love, partnership, and a purpose. The future might still hold battles and betrayals. Euron Greyjoy remained at large. The world remained unpredictable. But here, by the moonlit pool in Sunspear, she felt hopeful. They lingered until the lanterns burned low, exchanging quiet words and tender kisses. The hush of the garden enfolded them, as if the night itself blessed their union. When they finally returned to their quarters, Sansa felt the warm glow of possibility radiating through her. The next day, the treaties would begin in earnest. But tonight, they had this peace. This moment suspended in moonlight. And for her, for the North, for all the realm's battered survivors, that was enough to keep hope alive. She fell asleep in his arms, lulled by the distant sound of waves against the Dornish shore, dreaming of a realm finally free from the shackles of constant war. If the gods were kind, this dream would stretch into daylight, weaving a new tapestry, where House Stark and House Targaryen stood side by side, unbroken, unbowed, and unbent in their quest to safeguard the future.